The courtroom was packed. Every inch of the gallery, every seat, even the hallway outside, seemed filled with people who had come to witness the spectacle. The media had been hyping this case for weeks. Elon Musk, the genius entrepreneur known for his bold ventures and unpredictable nature, was embroiled in a high-profile lawsuit that could change the tech industry forever. This wasn't just another corporate case, it was a battle of ideals, power, and, of course, personalities. At the front of the room, Judge Margaret Ellison sat behind the bench, her stern gaze sweeping over the room as the proceedings began. She was a seasoned veteran of the courtroom, with over 20 years of experience in corporate law. She had seen it all, the egos, the dramatics, the dirty tricks. And yet, as she prepared to hear the opening arguments, something about the energy in the room made her raise an eyebrow. Elon Musk was about to make his entrance. The doors to the courtroom creaked open, and in strode Musk, effortlessly capturing everyone's attention. His usual casual style, dark jeans, a simple black t-shirt, and sneakers, seemed almost at odds with the gravitas of the situation. Yet, no one could deny the magnetic pull he had. As he took his seat at the defendant's table, his legal team flanking him, the room fell into an almost respectful silence. Judge Ellison adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. "Mr. Musk," she began, her voice measured and calm, "you're aware that we are here to settle a matter of significant legal importance. Your company, SpaceX, is facing accusations of intellectual property theft, among other claims. I expect this to be conducted with the utmost seriousness." Musk looked up at her, a half-smile playing on his lips. "Of course, Your Honor," he replied smoothly, his voice low and confident. "I have nothing but respect for the legal process." The judge shot him a sharp look, as if daring him to be anything but respectful. There was no doubt in her mind that Musk could be charming when he wanted to, but that didn't mean he would play by the rules. And in her court, rules were everything. With a brief nod, she motioned for the plaintiff's attorney to begin. The lead counsel for the opposing side, a polished and well-dressed lawyer named William Grant, stood up and strode to the front, papers in hand. He wasted no time diving into his argument. The case, he explained, was simple. Musk's company had stolen proprietary technology from their client, a competitor in the aerospace industry, and had used it to secure government contracts, raking in millions of dollars that weren't rightfully theirs. His tone was confident, almost condescending as he addressed the courtroom, his eyes briefly flicking over to Musk as if daring him to challenge the accusation. Musk's legal team remained stoic, but Musk himself seemed unfazed. He sat back in his chair, his hands clasped together in front of him, watching the proceedings with mild interest. Judge Ellison couldn't help but notice the lack of concern in his expression. Was he really as confident as he appeared, or was he simply putting on a show? There was something disarming about Musk's presence, so calm, so deliberate, yet at the same time, she sensed an underlying tension that told her he wasn't in the least bit relaxed. Grant finished his opening statement with a flourish, leaning forward slightly as he cast a pointed look at Musk. "We are confident that the evidence will show beyond a shadow of a doubt that SpaceX's success has been built on theft. The defendants have no leg to stand on." Judge Ellison nodded, her face impassive. "Thank you, Mr. Grant. We will hear from the defense next." Musk's lead counsel, a woman named Claire Walker, stood with the grace of a seasoned litigator. She wasn't as flashy as Grant, but her reputation for turning cases around in surprising ways was well known. Her calm demeanor was the perfect foil to the theatrics of the other side. She walked to the front of the room, turned, and gave the courtroom a moment of silence. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice steady, "we are not here to make excuses. We are here to explain the truth." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in. "The truth is that Mr. Musk and SpaceX have not stolen anything. What they've done is what this country was built on, innovation. They've pushed boundaries. They've created something out of nothing. And that's what we're going to prove." Musk leaned forward slightly, his eyes scanning the room. His legal team was prepared to fight. Every word they said, every move they made, was designed to win not just the case, but the hearts and minds of the jury. They weren't just defending their client, they were defending an idea, a vision that had been ridiculed and doubted by many, but ultimately, it was that very vision that had propelled Musk to success. As Walker continued, she spoke of the immense value of creativity in business, and how sometimes, the line between inspiration and invention could become blurred. The key question here is not whether there was theft, it's whether innovation has a price. And the price, Your Honor, is that sometimes, ideas will overlap. Judge Ellison remained silent, her fingers tapping gently on the edge of her bench. She wasn't convinced by the opening statements from either side. Both arguments had merits, but neither had yet made her feel the weight of the case in the way she was accustomed to. She needed more. She needed to see how this was going to unfold. And then, something unexpected happened. As the courtroom prepared to break for a short recess, Musk stood up. Without any formal announcement, he addressed the judge. Your Honor, Musk said, his voice ringing out across the room, I know I'm supposed to be just the defendant here. But I want to make one thing clear, everything we do at SpaceX is about the future. It's about advancing humanity. And if that means pushing the limits of what's possible, then so be it. I don't apologize for that. The courtroom was silent. Judge Ellison blinked, momentarily taken aback. Musk was known for his big speeches, his grandiose statements, but here, in a courtroom, of all places, he just made an open declaration of intent. The judge was silent for a moment, processing his words. A small smile tugged at the corner of her lips, but she quickly masked it with her usual stoic expression. This case was going to be far more interesting than she had anticipated. Mr. Musk, she said, her voice calm but carrying an edge, your statements may be unexpected. But they won't sway the legal process. We're here to find the truth, not to indulge in speeches. Musk smiled back, an expression that could be interpreted as both respectful and just a little bit mischievous. Of course, Your Honor. But behind his calm exterior, something was stirring. Musk knew this was just the beginning. This courtroom, this judge, wasn't going to be as easy to sway as the media or the public. But that only made it more exciting. As the session adjourned, the judge couldn't help but laugh under her breath. Well, she muttered to herself. This case might just be the ride of a lifetime. And just like that, the tone for the rest of the trial was set. There was no turning back now. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk's life was anything but ordinary. From the moment he was born in Pretoria, South Africa, on June 28, 1971, it seemed like the world was destined to be a witness to his extraordinary ambitions. His father, Errol Musk, a wealthy electromechanical engineer, and his mother, May Musk, a model and dietitian, were hardly ordinary people themselves. But it wasn't the luxury or the connections that defined young Elon, it was his relentless curiosity and drive. By the time Elon was 10 years old, he had already developed an insatiable thirst for knowledge. While most kids his age were engrossed in cartoons or video games, Elon was disassembling electronics, teaching himself programming, and reading science fiction. One of his first major achievements came at age 12, when he sold the code for a video game he had created, Blaster, for $500. His first venture into entrepreneurship was small, but the spark was undeniable. Elon's early years in South Africa were challenging. Bullied for being an outsider, partly due to his intellectual prowess and partly due to his awkward physical appearance, he learned to cope with isolation. His escape was always in the form of books, technology, and ideas. He didn't just dream of a better world, he envisioned a new reality for himself. It was this sense of ambition that led him to leave South Africa and head to Canada at the age of 17. He attended Queen's University in Ontario before transferring to the University of Pennsylvania in the U.S. to pursue degrees in physics and economics. The foundation for what would become an empire was being laid, brick by brick. But Musk wasn't content with just learning. In 1995, at the age of 24, he dropped out of Stanford University after just 2 days, choosing instead to dive headfirst into the world of entrepreneurship. His first venture was Zip2, a company that provided city guides for newspapers. It wasn't the most glamorous start, but it was a success. Zip2 was sold to Compaq for nearly $300 million in 1999. With the success of Zip2, Musk's reputation as a visionary entrepreneur began to take shape. But it was his next venture, X.com, that would truly set him on the path to global recognition. X.com was an online payment company that Musk co-founded, which later evolved into PayPal after a merger with Confinity. PayPal, of course, went on to be sold to eBay for $1.5 billion in 2002. By this point, Musk had made his first fortune, but more importantly, he had set his sights on something much larger. Musk's passion for technology and his desire to change the world didn't stop with online payments. He had bigger dreams, dreams that no one else seemed to share. In 2002, after selling PayPal, he founded SpaceX with the vision of reducing space transportation costs and making human life multiplanetary. Musk wasn't content with just sending satellites into space, he wanted to colonize Mars. The space industry, which was dominated by government organizations like NASA, was skeptical of Musk's ambitious plans. Yet, SpaceX's success in launching rockets and delivering cargo to the International Space Station proved to the world that Musk's vision wasn't just a pipe dream. He was building a new future. In parallel, Musk pursued other ventures that seemed like science fiction at the time. In 2004, he joined Tesla Motors, eventually taking over as CEO. Musk's goal was not just to create a high-end electric car, he sought to revolutionize the entire automobile industry, pushing the world toward sustainable energy. Critics laughed at him when he first revealed the concept of an electric car that could compete with gas-powered vehicles, but today, Tesla's vehicles are some of the most desirable and cutting-edge on the market. In addition to SpaceX and Tesla, Musk founded other companies like SolarCity, which aimed to revolutionize the solar energy market, and the Boring Company, which sought to alleviate traffic congestion with underground tunnels. Then there was Neuralink, his ambitious venture into brain-machine interfaces, and OpenAI, which he co-founded to promote artificial intelligence in a responsible manner. Musk had built an empire, and not just any empire, one that crossed industries, from space exploration to clean energy, artificial intelligence, and transportation. He wasn't just an entrepreneur, he was a disruptor, a man who wasn't afraid to take on the status quo and risk everything for the sake of innovation. The media adored him as much as they criticized him. Musk had become a polarizing figure, admired by many, loathed by others, but one thing was clear, he was unlike anyone the world had ever seen before. But Musk wasn't just motivated by a desire for wealth or fame. At his core, he believed in something bigger than himself. He often spoke about his concern for the future of humanity, and his goal of making life multiplanetary was driven by a fear that Earth might not be able to sustain future generations. To Musk, the stakes were always higher than business. This was about saving humanity from itself, about creating a legacy that would live on for centuries, even millennia. Despite his success, Musk's journey had been far from easy. He had faced personal and professional setbacks that would have broken many others. He had experienced early failures with both SpaceX and Tesla, where he risked everything on the line and came close to losing it all. The infamous Tesla Roadster nearly bankrupted him. But with each setback, Musk came back stronger, more determined to succeed. It was this resilience that had made him a legend. But as the world watched Musk's empire grow, they also witnessed his flaws. His impulsive behavior, his Twitter rants, his controversial opinions, all of it seemed to make him as notorious as he was admired. There were times when Musk's personality was as unpredictable as the rockets he launched into space. He didn't just bend the rules, he challenged them entirely. And for many, that was both part of his charm and his downfall. As the case against him unfolded, it was clear that Musk's past, both his triumphs and his controversies, would play a role in how the public viewed the trial. His larger-than-life personality had made him a cultural figure, and now, in this courtroom, he was about to face a legal battle that could reshape his career. But how did it all come to this? How had Elon Musk, the visionary who had revolutionized space travel and electric vehicles, found himself in a lawsuit over intellectual property theft? That, of course, was the question that would dominate the courtroom in the coming days. And as Musk sat there, listening to the proceedings, he knew that this fight, just like every other battle he'd fought in his life, wasn't about the legalities. It was about something much more personal. It was about proving that his way, his vision, wasn't just a fantasy. It was the future. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the trial entered its second week. Each side had presented its opening arguments, and now the evidence was beginning to unfold. The prosecution, led by William Grant, had been relentless in detailing how SpaceX allegedly used confidential designs from their competitors to launch their most successful missions. On the other side, Elon Musk's defense team, led by Claire Walker, was making a convincing case that innovation, rather than theft, had driven their groundbreaking success. But despite their efforts, the tension in the room continued to rise. Judge Margaret Ellison sat behind the bench, her face a mask of calm. But her eyes, sharp and perceptive, missed nothing. She had seen countless legal battles, but there was something about this one that felt different. The stakes were higher, not just for the companies involved but for the public perception of Musk himself. As the trial unfolded, the courtroom became a battleground not only for legal supremacy but for the future of an industry that had already been transformed by Musk's disruptive approach. "Your Honor, if I may," William Grant interrupted, standing up to address the court. He was holding a stack of documents in his hand, thick with technical jargon and schematics. "We have here the evidence that proves SpaceX used proprietary designs from our clients to launch its Falcon 9 rockets. These were not ideas born from Musk's team, but rather stolen concepts that were patented years before." The room fell silent as Grant passed the documents to the judge. Musk's defense team exchanged tense glances. The case was intensifying, and Claire Walker knew they had to act quickly to regain the upper hand. She stood up and walked to the front of the courtroom, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. "Your Honor," Walker began, her voice measured but unwavering, "I must challenge the validity of the so-called evidence Mr. Grant is presenting. SpaceX has always operated on the principle of pushing the boundaries of technology. The designs presented here were merely inspired by a long-standing body of research that has been in the public domain for years." She glanced at Musk, who was sitting confidently at the defendant's table, his face stoic but his eyes focused on the proceedings. The defense wasn't just defending SpaceX anymore, it was defending Musk's legacy as an innovator, someone who didn't play by the rules but bent them to create something new. Grant's eyes narrowed as Walker spoke, and when she finished, he stood, shaking his head slightly. "Miss Walker, you can try to paint it however you like, but the evidence doesn't lie. SpaceX's rockets bear a striking resemblance to designs our clients had been developing for over a decade. These were not generic ideas. These were proprietary technologies that were stolen, plain and simple." The room simmered with tension. The jury sat in silence, their eyes darting between the attorneys, trying to make sense of the claims. This wasn't just a courtroom drama, it was a contest of ideals. Grant was determined to prove that Musk and his companies were nothing more than opportunistic thieves, while Walker was working tirelessly to paint Musk as a misunderstood genius, a man willing to risk everything for progress. As the days passed, the trial began to take its toll on everyone involved. The pressure was mounting, and Musk's nerves, though well hidden, were beginning to show. He was used to the intense scrutiny, but there was something about the way the case was unfolding that made him uneasy. Musk had always prided himself on being ahead of the curve, on doing what others thought was impossible. But now, in the face of a legal battle that threatened to unravel his entire career, the future seemed less certain. In one particularly intense moment, Musk found himself alone in a quiet corner of the courthouse, his mind racing. His legal team had briefed him extensively on the case, but nothing could prepare him for the personal nature of it all. The accusations against him weren't just about business, they were about who he was as a person. They were about whether the world would continue to view him as a visionary or as someone who used others to get ahead. Mr. Musk, Claire Walker's voice broke through his thoughts as she walked over to him, a reassuring smile on her face. "Are you all right? You've been awfully quiet today." Musk gave her a faint smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm fine. Just thinking about how this could all end. The stakes are higher than I thought." Walker nodded sympathetically. "We knew this wouldn't be easy, but remember, your vision has always been bigger than this. The world doesn't just need your rockets, it needs your ideas. And that's what we're going to prove." Musk looked up at her, his eyes narrowing with determination. "I didn't come this far to let someone tear it all down with lies." As the trial continued, it became clear that the stakes were rising. Each side's argument was gaining traction, and the courtroom was filled with emotion as Musk's past began to haunt him. The accusations weren't just about SpaceX, they were about his very approach to innovation. Musk's entire career had been based on the idea that traditional rules didn't apply to him, that he could, and should, break the mold. But now, in the eyes of the court, that very mentality was being questioned. Grant, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, took every opportunity to remind the jury of Musk's unorthodox behavior. He painted a picture of a man who cared only about his own ambitions, willing to step on anyone to get to the top. "He doesn't care about the little guy, the companies whose hard work has been stolen. He only cares about his own ego and his quest for glory," Grant argued, his voice rising with intensity. The tension between the two sides had reached a boiling point. Musk's reputation was on the line, and the courtroom battle had become a public spectacle. Reporters and photographers were camped outside, snapping pictures and broadcasting every moment to a global audience. But inside, the stakes were even higher. It wasn't just about winning the case, it was about defining who Elon Musk was. Was he a thief, or was he a visionary? In the quiet moments of the trial, when the arguments died down and the court took recesses, Musk couldn't help but reflect on his journey. He had always known that disruption came with consequences. He had fought against traditional norms to build his empire, and now, he was fighting against accusations that threatened to tear it apart. This was a battle for more than just legal victory, it was a battle for the very soul of his future. As the court adjourned for the day, Musk leaned back in his chair, staring at the empty space before him. He could feel the weight of the trial pressing down on him. The rising conflict was only just beginning. The days turned into weeks, and the courtroom drama unfolded like an intense battle for the future of the modern industrial world. Elon Musk's life, his companies, his future, were hanging in the balance. The evidence and arguments were flying fast and furious. And yet, despite all the chaos, there was an unsettling calm within Musk. He had weathered storms before, and this felt like just another challenge he needed to face head-on. But this time, there was more at stake than ever before. Outside the courtroom, the world was watching. Headlines, blogs, and social media platforms were abuzz with speculation. Some viewed Musk as a visionary, a genius ahead of his time. Others labeled him as a manipulator, someone who used the brilliance of others for his own gain. The public was divided, and Musk was no stranger to that kind of scrutiny. After all, he had lived his life being a polarizing figure, someone who didn't care much for what people thought about him. But in this moment, the stakes felt different. This wasn't just about public opinion, it was about the integrity of everything he had built. One morning, as Musk sat in the courtroom, waiting for the proceedings to begin, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The tension in the air was palpable, and he had an unsettling sense that the case was entering a new phase, one where everything he had worked for could crumble if he wasn't careful. At the center of the growing conflict was the pivotal moment of the trial, the introduction of new, startling evidence. The prosecution had filed a surprise motion. Grant, with his smirk that never seemed to leave his face, had brought forth a new witness, a former employee of SpaceX who had worked closely with the engineering team during the early stages of the Falcon 9 rocket's development. The individual, whose identity remained confidential, was prepared to testify that certain designs had been directly lifted from a rival aerospace company's plans. The judge, Judge Margaret Ellison, looked grim as she reviewed the motion. Musk's legal team had no warning of the surprise witness. Claire Walker's usual composure faltered for a moment. If this witness was credible, it could change the course of the trial. If the testimony was damning, it could lead to irreversible damage for Musk. "Your Honor, I object to this new evidence," Walker said, her voice tight with frustration as she stood up. "We were not given proper notice of this witness, and it seems to be a last-minute tactic designed to throw off our case. We request a recess to review this new testimony thoroughly before it is presented to the court." Grant, not one to shy away from any opportunity, wasted no time in defending his surprise. "Your Honor, the defense had more than enough time to prepare. The witness was only discovered recently, and I believe their testimony is crucial to the case. This individual has first-hand knowledge of the inner workings of SpaceX's design process and can speak directly to the issues at hand." Judge Ellison paused for a long moment, the silence in the room thick with tension. Finally, she spoke. "The court will allow the testimony but will give the defense ample time to prepare their cross-examination. We will adjourn for the day and resume tomorrow." As the courtroom emptied for the day, Musk felt a deep sense of foreboding. His mind raced as he walked to the elevator with Claire and the rest of his legal team. "Do you think this will break us?" Musk asked, his voice low and tense. Claire gave him a reassuring glance. "We've been through worse, Elon. You know that. This is just another bump in the road. We'll cross-examine the witness and see if their testimony holds up." "But what if it's true?" Musk said, the weight of the question settling heavily on him. "What if we really did take their designs?" Claire hesitated for just a second. "Then we deal with it. But I don't believe it's as simple as that. We've built SpaceX on innovation, not theft. We'll prove that." Musk wasn't so sure. The thought of being accused of intellectual property theft, something that could tarnish his entire career, was too much to bear. He had worked his entire life to push humanity forward, to take risks that others deemed impossible. And now, it felt as though the world was about to question everything he had ever done. Later that night, alone in his hotel room, Musk couldn't sleep. He walked over to the window, staring out at the lights of the city below. His thoughts were a whirlwind of doubt and determination. Could this one person, this anonymous witness, bring down everything he had worked for? The more he thought about it, the more he realized that this moment was a defining one. This trial wasn't just about defending SpaceX, or Tesla, or any of his other ventures. It was about defending the very essence of what he believed in, that humanity could be more, that innovation could change the world. He wasn't going to let a single accusation take all of that away. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. Reporters were lined up outside, and cameras flashed as the participants made their way into the building. Inside, the mood was heavy. The moment of truth had arrived. Grant stood up first, his smug smile still in place as he prepared to introduce the surprise witness. "Your Honor, we would like to call our next witness to the stand." A tall man in a dark suit stepped forward, and Musk's heart skipped a beat. The witness was older, with graying hair and a serious demeanor. He was introduced as Thomas Reed, a former senior engineer at SpaceX who had worked there for several years. Reed's testimony began with a recount of his time at SpaceX, detailing his involvement in various projects, including the Falcon 9 rocket. His words were careful, calculated, and technical, but as he began discussing the designs of the rocket, the room grew silent. He described in great detail how certain components of the Falcon 9 seemed eerily similar to those of another aerospace company, a company that had been developing similar technology for years before SpaceX's first launch. Musk's mind raced. Was this it? Was this the end of the road? But then, something unexpected happened. As Reed continued his testimony, Musk caught a small inconsistency in his words. It was subtle, but it was there. His mind shifted into overdrive. This man wasn't telling the whole truth. As Reed took a breath to continue, Musk's legal team sprang into action. Your Honor, we'd like to request a recess for cross-examination, Claire Walker said sharply. We believe there are discrepancies in the witness's testimony that need to be addressed. The judge nodded, and the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Musk's heart pounded in his chest as the defense team prepared for the battle of a lifetime. This was the moment where everything could either fall apart, or, if they played their cards right, be turned on its head. The journey had reached its most critical point. The next day dawned with an unexpected tension that seemed to linger in the air. The courtroom was packed, more crowded than ever, as people eagerly awaited the continuation of the trial. The pressure was palpable, both inside and outside the courtroom. Cameras flashed in every direction, their lenses trained on Elon Musk, whose every move had become a spectacle. But for Musk, today was not about the cameras. It was not about the public or even the pressure of the trial itself. It was about the one thing that had always fueled his relentless drive, proving the truth. Today, that truth was hanging in the balance. Would they be able to counter the testimony of Thomas Reed, the surprise witness whose claims had shaken the foundations of Musk's defense? Or would Musk's empire begin to crumble beneath the weight of the allegations? Elon had seen a lot in his career, the highs and lows, the breakthroughs and setbacks, but nothing had ever felt quite like this. The uncertainty of the situation gnawed at him. If Reed's testimony held any weight, if the jury believed the ex-employee, it could change everything. All that he had worked for, the billions, the rockets, the grand ambitions of Mars and electric cars, could come crashing down in a matter of days. He could lose it all. But then there was something else. An unshakable voice inside him, the same voice that had driven him to create SpaceX in the first place. This wasn't about him. It wasn't about winning or losing. This was about the future. This was about what humanity could achieve if it pushed past its limitations. It wasn't about the rockets, or the cars, or even the lawsuits. It was about belief. Musk closed his eyes for a moment, taking in a steadying breath. The weight of the room felt like it was pressing on his chest, but in this silence, he found clarity. He had to fight for that vision, for the world he believed in. It wasn't just his own future that was at stake. It was the future of innovation itself. As the trial resumed, the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Judge Margaret Ellison called the session to order, her gavel striking the sound of finality. Ms. Walker, you may proceed with the cross-examination, the judge said. Claire Walker stood, her face calm but her eyes sharp. She walked to the front of the courtroom, positioning herself between the witness stand and the jury. As she spoke, her voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of urgency that carried through her words. Mr. Reed, she began, her gaze never leaving the witness. You claim that SpaceX used designs from a competitor for the Falcon 9. Is that correct? Reed, his expression impassive, nodded. Yes, that's correct. Walker held up a copy of a design schematic for the Falcon 9, one of the key pieces of evidence. And is it your testimony that the designs you worked on were identical to these? Reed's eyes flickered for a brief moment, but he quickly regained his composure. Yes, they bear a strong resemblance. Claire glanced toward Musk, who was sitting at the defense table. He gave her a subtle nod, a signal that he was ready for this to unfold. Walker turned back to Reed, taking a step closer, her voice firm. You've worked with SpaceX for several years, is that correct? She asked. Yes, Reed replied. I was employed by SpaceX from 2008 to 2014. And during your time there, you were involved with several projects, including the design of the Falcon 9, correct? Yes, I worked on the design of the Falcon 9 during its early development stages. Claire's eyes narrowed slightly. And did you ever bring up concerns about the design to anyone at SpaceX? Did you raise an alarm that these designs were stolen from another company? Reed hesitated, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. I never raised any concerns, he stammered. But I did notice similarities. Walker paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. The jury was hanging on every syllable, but she knew they needed more than Reed's vague recollections to make an impact. She was preparing to drive the point home. So, Mr. Reed, you never reported any stolen designs to your superiors. You didn't file any complaints or raise any alarms. Instead, you chose to leave the company in 2014. Is that correct? Reed shifted in his seat again, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. That's correct, he said softly. Walker gave him a pointed look. So your testimony here today is based solely on your observations, not any concrete evidence of wrongdoing, correct? Reed opened his mouth, but no words came out at first. The silence hung thick in the air. Finally, he responded, his voice strained. That's correct. Thank you, Mr. Reed, Claire Walker said, her voice cool and composed. She stepped away from the witness stand and returned to her seat, casting a glance at Musk. He could see the glimmer of hope in her eyes, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to feel it, too. The room seemed to exhale as Claire finished her cross-examination. The defense had done its job, exposing the inconsistencies in Reed's testimony. Now, it was up to the jury to decide. But the emotional weight of the trial was far from over. The questions lingering in Musk's mind went beyond the courtroom. It wasn't just about defending his business, it was about defending his identity. Elon Musk had always been known for challenging conventional wisdom, for doing the impossible. But now, the world seemed to be telling him that the very thing he had built was a lie. Elon, Claire said softly as the recess was called, pulling him from his thoughts. We've got this. You did what needed to be done. We exposed the flaws in their case. The jury will see that. Musk didn't respond immediately. His gaze was distant, as though lost in the overwhelming sea of emotions he had been swimming in for days. But then he turned to her, his expression softening. I don't know if I can handle it if this falls apart, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Claire placed a hand on his shoulder. You can handle anything, Elon. You've always pushed through. And we're here to make sure you do it again. As the courtroom session reconvened, the emotional tension was thick. The prosecution had been dealt a significant blow, but the final battle was still ahead. Musk felt it in his gut, a heavy certainty that this wasn't just a fight for legal supremacy, but a battle for his soul. In those final moments before the jury began deliberating, Elon Musk had one thought in his mind: I will not let this be the end. I will prove what I've always known to be true. The future of innovation is worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The days that followed were an emotional roller coaster for Elon Musk. The hours in the courtroom stretched on, each minute feeling like an eternity, but the defense team remained confident that the cross-examination had been successful. Even so, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that the trial was far from over. There was still the final stretch ahead, the closing arguments, the jury deliberations, and then, the most crucial moment of all, the verdict. The night before the closing arguments, Musk found himself alone in his hotel room, staring at the ceiling. His mind was a whirlwind, running through every moment of the trial, reliving each piece of testimony in cross-examination. Despite Claire's assurances, there were still doubts creeping in. He thought about his past, his childhood, his move to the United States from South Africa, the struggles he faced in the early days of Zip2 and PayPal, the countless times he had been told no and yet had pushed through. Every step of his journey had been marked by risk and doubt. And now, here he was again, fighting for everything he believed in. The weight of it all was overwhelming, but then he remembered something his father had told him years ago: when you find yourself in a battle you can't afford to lose, you dig in your heels and fight with everything you've got. Because the future you want doesn't come to those who give up. Musk sat up, his mind slowly focusing on the bigger picture. This wasn't just about defending SpaceX, Tesla, or any of the companies he had founded. It was about the future of human progress, the future of space exploration, of sustainable energy, of innovation. If this trial ended in defeat, it would be a devastating blow, not just for him, but for the vision he had worked so hard to bring to life. But if he won, if they could get past this moment, the message would be clear: no matter how many obstacles were thrown in his way, Musk would keep moving forward, one step at a time. As dawn broke over the horizon, casting a soft glow over the city, Musk finally stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the vast landscape stretching before him. He had always been captivated by the idea of exploring the unknown, of pushing the boundaries of what was possible. And in that moment, he realized that this trial, though it felt like the battle of his life, was just another unknown, just another challenge to face head-on. The courtroom was quieter than it had ever been when the final day of the trial arrived. The air was thick with anticipation as the closing arguments began. Every word from both sides carried weight, every sentence potentially altering the course of the future. Claire Walker stood before the jury, her voice calm yet commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we have shown you that the allegations brought against Mr. Musk and SpaceX are based on nothing more than a series of half-truths and inconsistencies. We have proven that Mr. Musk's vision has always been driven by a commitment to innovation and progress. We've shown you that Mr. Reid's testimony lacked credibility, and that no concrete evidence has been presented to support these accusations." She paused, her eyes sweeping across the jury. This trial isn't just about a legal dispute. It's about whether we, as a society, choose to support progress and the pursuit of knowledge. It's about whether we reward those who dare to dream big and take risks. Elon Musk is not perfect, but his vision, his work, and his contributions to humanity are undeniable. And that is why we believe you will find in favor of the defense. Claire finished her statement and walked back to her seat, her posture straight, her face unreadable. Musk, who had been sitting in silence, looked at her and gave her a small, appreciative nod. His heart pounded in his chest, but he had to admit that Claire had been right. He had fought as hard as he could. The rest was now in the hands of the jury. On the other side of the room, Grant rose, his voice dripping with smug confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we've shown you that Mr. Musk and his company, SpaceX, have built their empire not on innovation, but on deception. The testimony of Thomas Reid, a man who worked closely with Musk and his team, has proven that these designs were not created in a vacuum. Mr. Musk and SpaceX didn't innovate, they copied. They took the work of others and presented it as their own. The evidence is clear, and it's undeniable." Grant's eyes scanned the jury, his gaze hard. "This isn't just about money or business. This is about accountability. If we allow individuals like Mr. Musk to continue building empires on stolen ideas, we undermine the very foundation of innovation itself. You have the power to send a message. A message that no one, no matter how powerful, is above the law." As Grant finished his closing remarks, Musk felt a cold weight settle in his chest. The stakes had never been higher. This trial had become a battleground for more than just the future of his companies. It was now a fight for the very principles he believed in. When the judge called for a recess before jury deliberation, Musk left the courtroom and stepped outside, needing some air. The sky was clear, the sun bright in the morning sky. The world felt strangely quiet, as though everything was holding its breath. He was joined by Claire, who stood beside him in silence for a moment, allowing the gravity of the situation to sink in. "You've done everything you could, Elon," she said finally. "It's out of our hands now." Musk nodded but didn't say anything. The next few hours stretched on in uncertainty, every tick of the clock echoing in his mind. What would the jury decide? Would they rule in his favor, or would his vision, his life's work, be dismantled by the weight of these accusations? The jury's deliberation seemed endless. Musk spent the time pacing, his mind racing with what could happen next. It was the hardest part of the trial, waiting. And then, just as the clock seemed to tick into eternity, the door to the courtroom opened. The jury had returned. Musk's heart thudded in his chest as he returned to his seat, waiting for the verdict that would determine his future. Judge Ellison called the room to order. "Ladies and gentlemen, have you reached a verdict?" The jury foreperson stood, holding an envelope. "We have, Your Honor." Musk could feel the tension in the room, his breath shallow, his thoughts spinning. "Will the jury foreperson please read the verdict?" The foreperson nodded, his voice calm but firm. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Elon Musk, not guilty on all charges." For a long moment, the room was silent. Musk couldn't believe it. It felt surreal, as though the weight of the past weeks had been lifted off his shoulders in one sweeping decision. The room erupted into applause, but Musk remained still, his heart racing as he processed the words. Not guilty. He had won. For a brief moment, Elon Musk closed his eyes, reflecting on everything that had led him here. The struggles, the challenges, the doubt, all of it had brought him to this point. And now, it was over. But even as the applause rang out around him, Musk knew that this was not the end. The journey was far from over. There were always new challenges, new risks to take, and new visions to build. In the days immediately after the trial, Musk made a point to keep a low profile. He retreated to the privacy of his home, needing time to collect his thoughts. For the first time in years, he found himself reflecting on everything, his life, his companies, his relationships, and most importantly, his purpose. As the tech world celebrated his victory, many believed Musk's focus would turn immediately to business as usual. SpaceX would continue its launches, Tesla would push ahead with electric cars, and his other ventures would remain at the forefront of innovation. But for Elon, the events of the past few months had shaken him in ways that not even his vast empire of companies could shield him from. One afternoon, as Musk sat in his office at SpaceX headquarters, the weight of the trial still fresh in his mind, he received a call from Claire Walker, his lead attorney. "Elon, are you okay?" Her voice was gentle, but there was an underlying concern in her tone. Musk leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. "I'm fine. Just a little, exhausted, I guess." "I understand," Claire said. "You've been through a lot. But I wanted to talk to you about something important. I think you might need a break, a real one. You've been working non-stop for years, and I can't help but feel like this trial might have taken more out of you than you realize." Elon was silent for a long moment. He had always prided himself on his work ethic, his relentless drive to move forward. But what Claire said rang true. The constant pressure, the uncertainty of the trial, and the stakes, it had all taken a toll on him. "Maybe you're right," Musk finally admitted. "I've been so focused on the next challenge, the next launch, the next big thing. But I haven't really stopped to think about what any of it means. I've been so wrapped up in proving something to the world, I forgot to ask myself why I'm doing all this in the first place." Claire chuckled softly. "It's easy to lose sight of the bigger picture when you're always racing to the next milestone. But you can't keep pushing yourself endlessly. Maybe this trial was a wake-up call. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Elon. Your work speaks for itself." Musk stared out of his office window, watching the engineers and scientists working on the SpaceX projects below. The familiar hum of activity, the constant motion of progress, it was what he had built. Yet, for the first time, it felt distant. "I don't know where to start," he said quietly. "I've spent so many years building up SpaceX, Tesla, everything. But I haven't really taken a step back to see what I've created. Maybe it's time to ask myself what's next. Claire's voice softened. You've already done so much, Elon. Maybe it's time to start thinking about the next phase of your life. You've changed the world in ways that few ever could. Now, maybe it's time to focus on what really matters, your health, your personal life, and, if I may, your legacy. Musk took a deep breath, his mind spinning with possibilities. The road ahead seemed daunting, full of unknowns. But in that moment, he knew that it wasn't just about business anymore. It wasn't just about the next billion-dollar company or the next breakthrough in space exploration. It was about finding a new purpose, one that went beyond success or failure, beyond ambition. Several weeks passed, and as Elon took Claire's advice to heart, he began to focus more on what mattered outside of his companies. He took trips with his family, rediscovered his love for reading, and allowed himself to finally experience life without the constant pressure of work. He spent more time with his children, taking them on long hikes and explaining the universe to them in ways that made him feel like a teacher rather than a CEO. One evening, while sitting at the dinner table with his kids, Elon found himself reflecting on the conversations they had shared over the past few weeks. He had always been focused on the big picture, the rockets, the cars, the grand vision of Mars and electric vehicles. But now, as he watched his children laugh and play, he realized that perhaps the true meaning of life was simpler than he had thought. His son, XAEA 12, leaned over and asked, "Dad, when are we going to Mars?" Elon smiled, the weight of the world momentarily lifted from his shoulders. "Soon, buddy. But we've got time to enjoy the little things here first. I promise we'll get there." In that moment, Elon understood. Space exploration and innovation would always be his passion, but perhaps the real goal was not just to get to Mars. It was to build a future where humanity could thrive, not just on other planets, but here on Earth. To teach the next generation not just about the wonders of technology, but about love, responsibility, and what it truly means to make a difference in the world. He realized that, in many ways, the trial had been a turning point for him, a moment of self-discovery that had allowed him to step back and see the bigger picture. It wasn't just about the work anymore. It was about leaving a legacy of not just technological progress, but human progress. Weeks later, Musk was back at SpaceX, but this time, something had changed. He no longer carried the weight of the trial on his shoulders. His approach was different now, more patient, more reflective. He had already built a legacy, but now it was time to shift his focus from the immediate future to a broader one, one that encompassed both innovation and humanity's long-term goals. At the next SpaceX launch, as the rocket blasted off into the sky, Musk stood at the observation window, watching the flames rise. For the first time in a long time, he didn't just see a rocket, he saw the future. And it was something he was ready to face, not with fear or anxiety, but with clarity and purpose. As the rocket disappeared into the sky, Musk couldn't help but smile. There was still so much to be done. So many challenges ahead. But now, he understood, the real journey had only just begun. It had been several months since the trial had ended. Elon Musk had shifted his focus, not only on his companies but on the legacy he wanted to leave behind. He no longer felt the need to prove himself in the court of public opinion. His work at SpaceX and Tesla had already spoken volumes. But the recent period of reflection had sparked something new inside him, a desire to build something far greater than just another company. As the days passed, Elon's vision started to crystallize. While he had always been deeply focused on technology, on creating the next great leap forward in space exploration, sustainable energy, and artificial intelligence, he now realized that these advancements were just part of the puzzle. What really mattered was how they connected to the broader human experience, how they would improve lives on Earth, and how future generations would benefit. He knew he needed to bring together the brightest minds in various fields, scientists, educators, philosophers, environmentalists, people who shared his drive to not just change the world, but to ensure it was better for everyone. It was no longer about being first or the best, it was about doing what was right, what would leave a mark that truly mattered. One evening, as Elon sat in his private study at home, he made a decision that had been weighing on him for a long time. It was time to gather a new team, not just a team for a single mission, but a global coalition, a community united by the common goal of saving Earth while preparing for humanity's future on Mars. He knew this project would take years, even decades, to come to fruition, but it was something he felt was absolutely necessary if the human race was to thrive in the long term. He picked up the phone and called his closest ally and trusted confidant, Gwynne Shotwell, the president of SpaceX. "Gwynne, I have an idea," he began, his voice steady but full of excitement. "It's going to be a huge undertaking. I want to create something beyond SpaceX and Tesla, something that will last for generations." "Tell me more," Gwynne responded immediately, sensing his enthusiasm. "I want to form a global coalition, a movement, dedicated to finding sustainable solutions for Earth while also preparing humanity for interplanetary life. We're going to focus on climate change, education, space exploration, and social innovation. We'll involve scientists, philosophers, and artists, people who can think outside the box and bring new perspectives to solving the world's greatest problems. This is about leaving a legacy that matters." Gwynne paused for a moment, processing the weight of his words. "This is ambitious, Elon. But you've already changed the world. You've already shown that nothing is impossible." Elon smiled. "I know, but I want to make sure that what we build next is not just about advancing technology, it's about advancing humanity. If we don't shift our mindset and approach, none of our advancements in space or energy will mean anything in the long run. We need to act as one, united in our purpose. It's time to go beyond what we've done before." Gwynne's voice was thoughtful, but resolute. "I'm with you, Elon. I think this could be the most important thing we've ever done." The weeks that followed were a blur of meetings, calls, and brainstorming sessions. Elon reached out to environmental organizations, universities, think tanks, and even political leaders, looking for those who could help bring his vision to life. The response was overwhelming. People from all corners of the world, different backgrounds, ideologies, and fields of expertise, expressed their willingness to collaborate on this ambitious project. They saw the urgency in his message and recognized the potential for something truly groundbreaking. One of the first people Elon reached out to was Dr. Jane Goodall, the renowned primatologist and environmental activist. He had long admired her work in conservation and animal welfare, and he knew her insights would be invaluable for the movement he was building. "Elon," she said when they spoke, "I'm honored that you've reached out. What you're proposing is exactly what the world needs. We've been pushing for sustainable solutions for decades, but this effort, this coalition, could be the catalyst for real change." Elon was moved by her words. Dr. Goodall's decades of work with the environment had shown him that sustainability wasn't just about technology, it was about changing the way humanity viewed its relationship with the planet. Her perspective would help ensure that his new initiative would address environmental issues from a holistic point of view. As the months went on, more influential individuals came on board, environmental advocates, technologists, artists, and leaders from across the globe. What started as a dream became a reality, a global movement that would intertwine the future of Earth with the future of space exploration. But even as Elon poured his energy into the global coalition, his thoughts never strayed far from his vision of Mars. Space exploration had been his passion for decades, and the goal of establishing a human presence on Mars was still a driving force in his life. However, his approach had changed. Whereas before, he had seen Mars as a challenge to overcome, now he viewed it as a necessary step for the survival of the human race, a backup for Earth in case we failed to address the pressing issues here. The coalition he was building on Earth would ultimately serve as a foundation for life on Mars. The advancements in sustainable energy, environmental science, and global cooperation would all be applied to the space colonization efforts. The future of humanity was no longer just about exploring other planets, it was about creating a thriving future here on Earth, so that humanity could carry its lessons forward into space. A few months later, SpaceX launched its next big project, a reusable spacecraft designed to carry humans to Mars, with the goal of making the planet habitable. As the rocket soared into the sky, Elon was once again at the observation window. This time, however, he wasn't just watching a technological feat unfold. He was watching a step toward ensuring humanity's long-term survival. When the mission was completed successfully, Elon stood at the Mission Control Center with Gwyn and the rest of the team. The room erupted in applause. But Elon felt a deep sense of peace wash over him. The victory wasn't just in the successful launch, it was in knowing that he was moving forward with his ultimate goal, not just to send humanity to Mars, but to create a legacy of hope, sustainability, and progress for generations to come. As the celebration subsided, Elon made his way to the balcony overlooking the launch pad. He could see the stars above, each one a reminder of how much work was still to be done. But he was no longer overwhelmed by the enormity of it all. Instead, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. "Gwyn," Elon said quietly, "this is just the beginning." She smiled, looking out at the stars as well. "Yes, it is. The beginning of something bigger than any of us." And for the first time in a long while, Elon Musk felt a sense of calm. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for once, he knew that he was on the right path. Months had passed since the launch of SpaceX's latest Mars mission, and while the technological advancements were impressive, Elon Musk's focus had shifted significantly. The global coalition he had worked tirelessly to establish was slowly gaining traction, but it was proving to be more challenging than he had anticipated. The hurdles were not just technological, but ideological. As he sat in a sleek conference room in his new innovation hub, designed specifically for the global coalition, Elon found himself facing one of the most complex issues of his life. He wasn't just trying to bridge the gap between space exploration and sustainability anymore. Now, he had to figure out how to bridge the divide between competing interests, technology and ethics, capitalism and social good, progress and preservation. "We're getting pushback, Elon," Gwyn Shotwell said, sitting across from him. "Some of the environmental groups are questioning our approach. They think our focus is too heavily on the long-term goal of Mars colonization, and not enough on solving immediate problems here on Earth." Elon leaned forward, his fingers steepled. "I understand their concerns. But they don't see the bigger picture. Mars isn't just a backup plan, it's a necessary next step for humanity. But everything we learn from it will directly benefit Earth. The two go hand in hand. Without a future in space, we risk stagnating on this planet." "I agree with you, but the public perception is tricky," Gwyn replied. "People want to see real-world solutions now: climate change, poverty, inequality. They don't want to hear about Mars as an escape. It's a hard sell." Elon's mind raced, piecing together the next steps. He had always been able to tackle technical problems, design new technologies, and chart the course for companies like SpaceX and Tesla, but this was different. This was about shifting a collective worldview, something that no technology or rocket launch could solve on its own. "We need to show them the tangible connection," Elon said finally. "We can't just talk about the potential of space. We need to show how these technologies, renewable energy, sustainable farming, water purification, are connected to both Earth and Mars. How the solutions we develop for space will make life here on Earth better. Let's bring the two together." Gwyn nodded, but there was still hesitation in her eyes. "The question is, how do we convince people who are skeptical of the idea of colonizing another planet? There's a significant divide between those who see the future as one of exploration and those who think we should focus entirely on saving the Earth first." Elon took a deep breath. It was a valid point. As much as he believed in the necessity of reaching beyond Earth, he knew that the very people who needed to be convinced were the ones who would feel the immediate consequences of inaction. "We begin with education," Elon said, the idea suddenly crystal clear in his mind. We need a global education campaign that explains not only the risks we face here on Earth, but also the potential for solving them. We need to demonstrate how technology, our technology, can create solutions for climate change, poverty, and social inequality. And we need to show how those solutions will eventually power our efforts to explore the stars. Gwyn looked at him with renewed determination. That's a bold approach. But how do we sell that message in a way that resonates with everyone, not just the tech world? Elon's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. We start with storytelling. We need to bring the human element into it. People don't relate to abstract concepts like interplanetary life or carbon-neutral cities. They relate to personal stories, the story of a family who finds new sources of clean water, or a child who lives in a city powered by sustainable energy. We show how progress is possible, not just for the privileged few, but for everyone. The next few weeks were spent developing the groundwork for this educational campaign. Elon reached out to some of the world's most prominent thinkers in various fields, climate scientists, sociologists, political leaders, and even philosophers. He knew that, to change the narrative, he needed to bring together voices from all sides of the debate. The result was a powerful collaboration, a series of global broadcasts, documentaries, and live events designed to engage the public and demonstrate the interconnectedness of Earth's future and space exploration. The campaign would feature testimonials from people whose lives had already been improved by advancements in renewable energy, education, and medicine, technologies, many of which were the result of SpaceX's and Tesla's innovations. As the campaign began to take shape, the first documentary was unveiled to the public. It opened with footage of a family living in a rural area in Africa, where they had gained access to solar-powered electricity for the first time. The children, once studying by candlelight, now had access to the internet and could attend school virtually. The mother spoke about how this new source of energy had allowed her to start a small business that helped support her community. The next segment showed a coastal city that had transitioned to fully sustainable energy through a combination of wind, solar, and tidal power. People who had once lived in areas that were regularly flooded due to rising sea levels were now seeing their homes protected by advanced flood barriers and new, energy-efficient housing designs. In each of these stories, the underlying message was clear: these were the same kinds of technologies that would be used to support life on Mars. The same innovation that powered Earth's future would propel humanity into the stars. Elon watched the first cut of the documentary with Gwyn and a team of media experts. As the credits rolled, Gwyn turned to him. "You've done it. This is going to resonate with people." Elon's expression was one of quiet satisfaction. He knew this was just the beginning, but it felt like the right direction. "We've still got a long way to go," he said, "but we're moving in the right direction. We're bridging the divide. And once people see how these technologies improve their lives here on Earth, the idea of space exploration won't seem so distant." But the challenges were far from over. As the campaign rolled out, criticism did not disappear entirely. There were still those who questioned the morality of investing in space exploration while people on Earth continued to suffer. The debate over priorities was as heated as ever, and Elon knew that the next phase of his journey would require not only technological solutions but deep social and political collaboration. Despite the obstacles, Elon felt more confident than ever in his mission. His new focus was clear: space exploration would not just be an escape plan, it would be part of a greater vision for the future of humanity. Earth and Mars, side by side, with innovations from both helping to propel human civilization forward. He had always known that the road to the stars would not be easy. But now, he was determined to ensure that the journey was as much about preserving life on Earth as it was about creating a new future for humanity beyond the stars. The day the documentary campaign was released, the world watched. Elon Musk and his team held their breath as the first public reactions began flooding social media and news outlets. For weeks, they had toiled over the messaging, ensuring that it was clear, relatable, and rooted in the real-world impact of their technologies. This wasn't just about flashy rockets and grand plans for Mars, it was about real people, real lives, and how innovation could solve the most pressing challenges facing the planet. The initial response was mixed. Some were inspired by the stories of families empowered by solar energy and communities transformed by sustainable technology. These were the voices of hope, the messages that celebrated the potential of change. Others, however, questioned the larger goal of interplanetary colonization, still skeptical of its relevance in a world grappling with immediate crises like poverty, inequality, and climate change. "I still don't see why we're spending so much time and money trying to get to Mars," one commenter wrote. "Earth has enough problems, and we're talking about sending people to another planet? Seems like a waste." Another user, however, posted, "This is exactly what we need. Innovations that not only help us survive here but prepare us for a future beyond. Earth and Mars, together. I'm on board." In a press conference that followed, Elon addressed the skepticism head-on. The room was packed with reporters, cameras flashing, microphones poised to catch every word. The question on everyone's mind was clear: would he continue to focus on Mars exploration, or would he shift all efforts to solving the problems here on Earth? "Many people are asking me," Elon began, adjusting his suit jacket, "why we should focus on Mars when there are so many urgent issues here on Earth. And I want to be very clear, the two are not mutually exclusive. The challenges we face on Earth are real. Climate change is real. Inequality is real. But just because we have immediate problems does not mean we should abandon the long-term solutions. Mars is not an escape plan. It's a test bed for the future. The technologies we are developing for space will directly benefit us here. The lessons we learn from surviving on another planet can teach us how to thrive here on Earth." The room was quiet for a moment as reporters scribbled notes and processed his words. He continued, his voice unwavering. "We are not abandoning the Earth. We are building for the future. We are innovating for humanity. This is not about saving a select few. It's about ensuring that all of humanity, for generations to come, will have a place to live, to grow, and to thrive, whether that is on Earth or beyond." One reporter raised their hand. But critics argue that the cost of space exploration could be better spent addressing issues like poverty, clean water, or healthcare. "What do you say to them?" Elon paused before responding, leaning forward. "I say that these are all important issues. But the technologies we are advancing are already making a difference. We've created affordable electric vehicles, we've revolutionized solar energy, and we're developing technologies that could help provide clean water and better medical solutions. Space exploration is not the enemy of progress, it is part of it. And the key is understanding that these goals are interconnected. A sustainable future on Earth and a future in space are both possible." The press conference ended with mixed reactions. Some were moved by his speech, while others remained unconvinced. Elon, however, felt a shift. For the first time in a while, he wasn't trying to win over everyone. He was focused on the long-term impact, the future of humanity. Whether people understood it now or not, this mission had to continue. Meanwhile, the global coalition continued to grow, attracting new voices from around the world. Political leaders, climate advocates, entrepreneurs, and even artists began to join the conversation. The coalition now had a clear mandate: create a sustainable Earth while also preparing for the inevitable future of space exploration. Elon worked closely with the group, navigating political hurdles and funding challenges. Many governments, particularly in developing countries, were still hesitant to invest in space-related projects when the needs on the ground were so urgent. But as the coalition worked together, it became clear that there was a way to integrate these goals. The next big challenge came in the form of an international summit. Elon and Gwynne had been invited to present their vision at the United Nations, where they would address leaders from around the world. The stakes were high. If they could secure global backing, the coalition would gain the momentum it needed to tackle the crises facing Earth, and solidify the vision of interplanetary cooperation. As the summit approached, tensions ran high. Elon had always excelled in high-pressure situations, but this was different. He wasn't just selling a product or a vision for his companies. He was pitching a vision for the future of humanity, and that meant navigating politics, ideologies, and countless vested interests. On the day of the summit, the world's eyes were on New York City. The United Nations General Assembly Hall was packed, and representatives from dozens of countries filled the seats. Elon stood at the podium with Gwyn by his side. The room grew quiet as he began his address. "Ladies and gentlemen," he started, his voice steady but filled with conviction, "the future of humanity is not bound by borders, not by politics, not by nations. The future of humanity is a shared future. We have a responsibility to each other and to future generations to address the challenges we face now, climate change, inequality, and conflict, but we must also prepare for the future. A future that includes not just Earth, but other planets. And in that future, Earth and space will not be separate. They will be one." He continued, outlining the dual goals of the global coalition: to advance sustainability on Earth through innovative technologies and to lay the groundwork for humanity's future in space. The presentation included highlights from the documentary series, showcasing how these technologies were already making a difference in communities around the world. Elon emphasized that investing in space exploration was not a diversion from addressing Earth's issues, it was a crucial part of the solution. The room was silent as he finished. The weight of his words lingered in the air. Then, slowly, applause began. First tentative, then growing louder. It wasn't unanimous, but it was a start. Leaders from several countries stood, offering their support for the coalition's mission. But the journey was far from over. There would be more debates, more resistance, and more challenges ahead. Elon knew this. He had always known that progress would come with opposition. But now, more than ever, he believed that the world was on the cusp of something transformative, something that could shape the future for generations to come. That night, as the summit concluded and Elon and Gwyn returned to their hotel, they took a moment to reflect. "We've made progress," Gwyn said, her voice filled with cautious optimism. "But there's still so much work to be done." Elon nodded, looking out at the skyline of New York City. "I know. But every step forward counts. This is just the beginning." And for the first time in a long while, he felt confident that, despite all the challenges, humanity was moving toward a future where Earth and the stars were no longer separate. They were linked. And together, they would shape the future of humankind. The momentum Elon had built up over the past months was undeniably impressive. Yet, just as the coalition began to gain widespread support, a major setback hit that no one had anticipated: a colossal failure during a routine SpaceX launch. It was meant to be a demonstration of the reliability of reusable rockets and the culmination of years of innovation. The Falcon Heavy was scheduled to launch a new communications satellite into orbit, a mission that had been months in the making. The whole world was watching, and for Elon and SpaceX, this was more than just another successful mission. It was a key moment to show that their advancements in space technology could help solve pressing issues back on Earth, from improving internet access in remote areas to connecting underserved communities globally. But then it happened. The rocket launched flawlessly, until it didn't. 15 minutes into the flight, as the world watched in awe, something went terribly wrong. A massive explosion ripped through the skies as the second stage of the rocket failed to separate properly. The payload, the satellite that could have revolutionized communication in developing regions, was lost. The room at SpaceX headquarters fell into stunned silence. Elon stood in front of the large screen, staring at the chaotic footage of the rocket disintegrating midair. His mind was racing. What went wrong? Why hadn't the backup systems worked? Gwyn Shotwell, SpaceX's president, walked in quietly, her face reflecting the weight of the situation. "We need to address this, Elon," she said softly. The press will be all over this. It's not just a failure for SpaceX, it's a blow to the entire coalition. Our credibility is at stake. Elon remained silent for a moment. The last thing he wanted was for this to be seen as another setback that would add fuel to the fire of his critics. The timing couldn't have been worse. The space exploration community, and the world at large, was watching, and this failure might make it seem as though his dreams of making Mars a reality were unattainable. Worse, it could undermine the public's trust in the technologies SpaceX was developing, technologies that were crucial for the long-term vision of Earth's sustainability and interplanetary cooperation. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and controlled. "We'll fix this. We always do. But we need to be transparent. We need to show the world that failure is part of the process, but it's not the end of the road. This is just a hurdle we will overcome." The following days were filled with internal investigations, analysis, and meetings to uncover what had gone wrong. The problem turned out to be a simple yet critical malfunction in the separation mechanism, a mechanical failure in the thrusters that was supposed to push the second stage away from the core. It was an issue that, while rare, had never been anticipated in this specific design configuration. It wasn't a problem SpaceX hadn't seen before. But the implications were larger now. This wasn't just about fixing a rocket, it was about rebuilding public confidence. Elon knew that the road to redemption would be a long one. The press conference Elon held a week later was tense. Reporters from every major outlet had gathered, eager to hear how he would address the failure. There were no guarantees of what the public reaction would be, especially given the political climate surrounding the global coalition. Standing at the podium, Elon spoke with unwavering resolve. "What happened last week was a failure. And we will own it. But we will not let this failure define us. At SpaceX, we've always believed that failure is part of the journey. We learn from it, we grow, and we continue forward." He paused, letting the words sink in. Space exploration is an inherently risky endeavor. It's a journey that requires constant learning, adapting, and evolving. This setback doesn't change our mission, it strengthens it. We are committed to creating the technologies that will not only help us reach Mars but also improve life on Earth. And despite what happened, we will continue that mission with even greater determination. The room was quiet for a moment, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Then, the questions started coming, about the specifics of the failure, the timeline for fixing the issue, and, most importantly, how this would affect the broader goals of the coalition. Elon took a deep breath and responded, "We've already implemented a solution, and we're moving forward with the next launch. This incident won't stop us from achieving our goals. If anything, it will only make us stronger." But the damage had been done. While many in the press appreciated his candidness, others seized the opportunity to criticize his ambitious vision. We've seen this before with other so-called tech moguls promising the moon, only to fall short, one op-ed headline blared. Elon Musk's vision of space exploration may be more science fiction than reality. The blowback was fierce. Public opinion began to waver, with some of the earlier supporters of Musk's vision beginning to question his judgment and whether his lofty goals were too grandiose to be realistically achieved. Space exploration suddenly felt like an unattainable dream once again. And with it, the global coalition seemed to falter. Leaders within the coalition grew concerned about being associated with a failed space mission. At SpaceX headquarters, Elon was ready for the long haul. While some of his team were understandably shaken, he knew that this was not the time to show weakness. It was the perfect moment for SpaceX to regroup and come back stronger, to show the world that failure wasn't the end, but rather a stepping stone on the path to greatness. Over the next few weeks, the SpaceX team worked tirelessly, analyzing the data, improving their processes, and preparing for the next launch. This time, Elon wasn't going to leave anything to chance. He was going to make sure this next launch was flawless. The pressure was on, but he had faced tough situations before. This was just another challenge to overcome. After all, failure, as he often said, was just an opportunity to learn and improve. One evening, while reviewing the latest updates on the new rocket prototype, Elon found himself reflecting on the bigger picture. This was more than just a business venture, it was about the future of humanity. And while setbacks were inevitable, they couldn't stop him from pushing forward. "We're not just building rockets," he muttered to himself. "We're building a future." As he looked out at the vast, starlit sky from his office window, he felt the weight of that mission. Failure, even a massive one, would not deter him. He had seen the future, he knew what was possible, and he wasn't going to let a single setback get in the way of humanity's potential to reach the stars. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon sat quietly in his office, the weight of the past few weeks pressing down on him. The public relations nightmare of the failed launch had taken its toll, not just on SpaceX's reputation, but also on his own sense of purpose. The world had been watching, expecting success, and instead, they had witnessed failure. In the world of high-stakes business and global ambitions, failure was a hard pill to swallow. But Elon had never been one to stay down for long. He was used to failure. In fact, he expected it. Each time he faced a setback, he saw it as an opportunity to learn, to grow, to pivot. But this time, it was different. The pressure had never been greater. The global coalition was beginning to lose its steam, and with it, the future of sustainable technologies, space exploration, and the interplanetary future he envisioned seemed to be hanging by a thread. There was a knock on his door, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was Gwyn. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice calm, but there was a glint of concern in her eyes. "I'm fine," Elon said, standing up and pacing slowly. "We've faced challenges before. This is just another obstacle. But it's bigger than I thought." "People are asking questions," she replied. "About whether or not this is the right time to push forward with Mars. They're questioning the long-term strategy. They're questioning if we're focusing on the right things." Elon stopped pacing and looked her in the eyes. "I know. And that's what scares me. If we don't get this right, if we don't show them that we can overcome this, the whole vision will crumble. Everything we've worked for, the global coalition, the future of space exploration, it's all at risk." Gwyn took a step closer, her tone firm but supportive. "Elon, you've always said that failure is part of the process. We're going to fix this. You can't let this one failure define everything. People are still watching. They need to see us get back up." She was right. As much as the failure stung, it was how they responded that would matter most. The world didn't need to see perfection, they needed to see resilience. Within the next few days, the SpaceX team was back at work, but this time, there was a heightened sense of urgency. Elon called for an all-hands-on-deck meeting. He wanted the best minds focused on the next mission, and he was willing to do whatever it took to make sure they got it right. "We're not going to just fix the problem," Elon said in the meeting, addressing the engineers, technicians, and designers who had gathered. "We're going to show the world that we learn from our mistakes. This is more than just launching rockets. We are changing the future. And that means we have to do it right." The room buzzed with energy as the team got to work. The failure had rattled them, but it had also galvanized them. Everyone knew the stakes. Elon knew that they needed to do more than just fix the rocket. They needed to show the world that they were committed to the mission, no matter the cost. They couldn't afford another failure, especially not with the eyes of the world on them. They re-examined every component of the rocket. The separation mechanism that had caused the failure was redesigned with more robust fail-safes. A new system of checks and redundancies was implemented to ensure that the rocket's integrity would hold. Each engineer worked tirelessly, determined not to let another failure happen. But as much as Elon focused on the technical side, he also knew that he needed to rebuild the narrative. SpaceX needed to show that it was still the company that could take risks, that could push boundaries, that could innovate. At the same time, Elon reached out to members of the global coalition. He wanted to make sure they knew that this failure wouldn't stop their shared mission. The coalition was still strong, and the work they were doing was too important to give up on now. He met with leaders from Europe, Africa, and the Americas, key partners who had joined the coalition to address climate change, poverty, and the future of humanity in space. He assured them that SpaceX's mission was still aligned with their goals, that the technology they were developing wasn't just for Mars, it was for the Earth. "We can't give up now," Elon told them during a virtual summit. "We are on the precipice of something that can change the world. The technology we are creating isn't just for those who can afford it, it's for everyone. We're building a future where we can all thrive, and that starts with our work here on Earth." Elon's words had a profound impact. Leaders reaffirmed their support, recognizing that the path to progress was never easy. This setback didn't mean the end of their mission. It meant that they would need to be even more focused, more determined. Despite the renewed support from the coalition, the pressure continued to mount. The media, of course, didn't let the failure go unnoticed. Some outlets were relentless, claiming that Musk's vision was doomed to fail, that SpaceX wasn't as reliable as it once seemed. Headlines like "Elon Musk's vision of space now in peril" circulated widely, amplifying the doubt and uncertainty surrounding the mission. But Elon wasn't focused on the headlines. He had seen this kind of media frenzy before. The critics would always be there. It was the long-term vision that mattered. And the long-term vision was as clear as ever. He spent hours working with Gwynne, talking through every detail of the next launch. This time, they would be ready. They couldn't afford another mistake. The world needed to see that SpaceX could deliver, that their vision for a sustainable Earth and the future of Mars wasn't just a dream, it was a reality that could happen, step by step. The countdown for the next launch began, and with it, the rebuilding of public confidence. The day of the launch arrived. The entire SpaceX team was on edge. Every eye was on the Falcon Heavy, the rocket poised to lift off once again. The weight of their success or failure hung in the balance. Elon stood in the command center, his gaze fixed on the live feed of the rocket. He could feel the tension in the air. His heart raced, but his mind was clear. This was it. This was their chance to prove the world wrong. The rocket lifted off without a hitch, soaring into the sky. There were no issues this time. The second stage separated flawlessly, and the satellite was deployed into orbit as planned. Cheers erupted in the command center as the successful launch was confirmed. Elon allowed himself a small smile, but it was brief. He knew this was just the beginning. They had made it through one hurdle, but the journey was far from over. The work had to continue, the mission had to move forward, and the coalition needed to remain strong. As the celebrations died down and the team began to pack up, Gwynne approached Elon. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with relief. "But there's still so much to do." Elon nodded, looking out over the launch pad. "We've taken a step forward. But now we need to keep pushing. We're not stopping until humanity is ready to take the next leap." As he walked away from the command center, he knew the road ahead would continue to be full of challenges. But there was one thing he was certain of: they had shown the world that failure was not the end. It was just the beginning. The success of the recent launch was exactly what Elon Musk needed. It gave him the boost of confidence that SpaceX, and by extension, the global coalition, needed to keep moving forward. But it wasn't just about the success of the mission. It was about how the world would perceive this rebound and whether it would reignite the momentum they had built. Despite the positive media coverage, the pressure on Elon had only intensified. Success on one front didn't automatically erase the challenges they still faced on the ground. The coalition was under scrutiny. People were asking if the world was truly ready for such massive change. Could global systems and governments actually coordinate on the scale required for humanity's survival and the vision of a multiplanetary existence? Elon spent countless hours meeting with the heads of the coalition, trying to reinforce the importance of staying united despite the setbacks. They had a mission, and it was bigger than any single person, company, or failure. He understood that the stakes were higher than ever. Earth's climate crisis was worsening, poverty was rampant, and the global economy was uncertain. Every day counted, and they couldn't afford to waste any time. At a late-night meeting with the coalition's leadership, Elon found himself in a heated discussion with leaders from Europe, Africa, and Asia. The room was tense as they debated the allocation of resources and priorities. "While I admire your commitment, Elon," said Sarah Castillo, the head of the Latin American section of the coalition, "we have to consider whether the resources needed to fund these space projects could be better spent addressing Earth's immediate needs. People are dying here, and we're talking about colonizing Mars." Elon could feel his pulse quicken. He knew she had a point. The world's problems couldn't be ignored for the sake of futuristic ambitions, no matter how important they were. But he also knew that without the technologies they were developing, there wouldn't be a future worth saving. "I understand your concern," he said, his voice calm yet firm. "But I assure you, our efforts on Mars are not separate from our work here on Earth. The technologies we are developing, solar power, sustainable energy, advanced communication systems, these will improve life on Earth first. The push for space exploration is not just about escaping Earth. It's about saving it." The debate raged on, but as the hours passed, something in the room shifted. Slowly, the leaders began to see the bigger picture, the interconnectivity of the technologies being developed, the potential for both Earth and Mars to benefit. Elon's words, though blunt, held a clarity that couldn't be ignored. Eventually, the leaders agreed to prioritize a more balanced approach, continuing to push forward with space exploration while ensuring that resources were allocated to solve immediate problems on Earth. It was a small but significant victory. In the days that followed, the coalition began to push out a new message, building a future on Earth, reaching for the stars. It was the kind of slogan that represented both their immediate mission and the long-term vision that Elon had always preached. But even with the support of the coalition behind him, Elon knew that the battle for public opinion was far from over. The media wasn't letting up. Articles continued to question whether SpaceX's failures had tarnished its credibility, whether Elon's ambitions were too grand, whether the entire project was a waste of resources. For every story celebrating the recent success of the Falcon Heavy launch, there was another headline questioning his sanity or his strategy. Meanwhile, back at SpaceX, the team was working overtime. The engineers and scientists were more focused than ever on perfecting their next big mission. The failure of the previous launch had led them to rethink everything. Elon had been clear about his expectations, they were going to get it right this time, no matter what. But despite their dedication, the atmosphere in the SpaceX headquarters felt heavy. The team was under pressure to deliver, and the world was watching closely. There was no room for error. Elon was no stranger to pressure. In the early days of SpaceX, he had faced overwhelming odds. People told him he was crazy for trying to build a private space company. He had poured every bit of his fortune into the venture, and if the first 3 launches had failed, SpaceX would have been finished. But he had pushed through, and eventually, he had proven them wrong. Now, years later, with a multi-billion-dollar mission on his shoulders, he faced a new kind of pressure, the pressure of not just SpaceX's future, but the future of humanity. He'd come to realize something: it wasn't enough to be right. It wasn't even enough to be successful. It was about the long-term goal, and it was about the people who would benefit from the work they were doing, on Earth and on Mars. He couldn't let the criticism, the failures, or the obstacles shake him. So, he doubled down. Late one night, Elon found himself alone in the SpaceX command center. The building was mostly empty, and the quiet hum of the computers around him was the only sound. He sat in front of a large screen showing satellite images of Mars. He could almost feel the surface of the red planet, the winds, the distant horizon where the first human colonies would one day rise. "This is what we're doing it for," he murmured to himself. He wasn't just building rockets. He was building hope. Hope that one day, humanity wouldn't just be confined to Earth. Hope that future generations could have a new start on a new world, where they could do better, be better, and live longer lives. And as he sat there, the full weight of the mission pressed down on him. It wasn't about today. It wasn't about tomorrow. It was about decades, even centuries, of progress. It was about survival. If the Earth was to survive, humanity needed to think beyond its own planet. Mars was just the first step. Elon stood up and walked toward the large window of the command center. He looked out over the SpaceX campus, his thoughts racing. There was still so much to do. So many people to convince. So many challenges to overcome. But he was ready. He had no choice but to be ready. The next morning, the media buzzed with the latest development. Another SpaceX mission had launched successfully, with the Falcon 9 delivering a payload of critical communications satellites into orbit. The news coverage was positive this time. There were no explosions, no failures. Just success. But Elon knew that this was just one small victory in the larger battle. The real test was still ahead. The push to Mars. The work of the coalition. The promise of a better, more sustainable world. And he was going to make sure the world saw that they could do it. The pressure, the doubts, the setbacks, they would all be worth it in the end. The early morning sun rose over the SpaceX campus, casting a golden hue on the sleek, futuristic rockets poised for their next mission. The success of the recent satellite launch had provided a much-needed boost to morale, but Elon Musk knew better than to celebrate prematurely. The journey ahead was fraught with obstacles, and even the smallest mistake could set them back by months, maybe even years. Elon stood by the window of his office, looking out over the sprawling complex, deep in thought. He couldn't shake the feeling that the clock was ticking. Each day that passed brought them closer to a critical juncture. The eyes of the world were on them, and failure wasn't an option. It wasn't just about the technical challenges. It was about something much bigger, how to unite the world around a common purpose. The coalition, though solid in principle, was a collection of disparate nations, each with its own interests, concerns, and agendas. If they were to succeed, they would have to overcome more than just rocket science. They had to find a way to work together, to trust each other, and to make sacrifices for the greater good. A knock on the door broke him from his reverie. He turned to find Gwyn standing in the doorway, a concerned look on her face. "Morning, Elon," she said. "We need to talk. It's about the coalition. There's growing resistance in some regions." Elon sighed, rubbing his eyes. "I knew this would happen. They're questioning whether the funds are being spent wisely, especially when we've had a few setbacks. People are starting to doubt whether our goal is achievable in our lifetime." Gwyn nodded. "That's exactly it. There are whispers about shifting priorities, pulling resources from space exploration to address more immediate issues on Earth, climate change, poverty, healthcare. The coalition's leadership is split." Elon walked over to his desk and sat down, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the surface. He had anticipated this. The vision for Mars and the greater mission of the coalition had always been a tough sell. Many leaders saw the space program as an expensive gamble rather than a solution to Earth's problems. The question, as always, was whether space exploration and the mission to Mars were worth the enormous costs. "You knew this wasn't going to be easy," Gwyn continued. "We can't ignore the concerns of the people back home. Some countries are struggling to justify the cost of space exploration while people are still dying from lack of clean water or basic healthcare." Elon looked at her, his eyes steely. "I understand. But we have to think about the long-term picture. The future of humanity isn't just about solving Earth's immediate problems. It's about ensuring we don't destroy ourselves in the process. Space exploration isn't just about reaching other planets, it's about ensuring humanity's survival. Gwyn took a deep breath. I agree, Elon. But the coalition is wavering. If we don't act soon, we might lose their support. We need to show them something tangible, a breakthrough, something that proves the investment is worth it. They're tired of waiting for promises of a better future. Elon sat in silence for a moment, contemplating her words. He was no stranger to setbacks and delays, but the idea of losing the momentum of the coalition, and with it, the dream of Mars, was a blow he wasn't prepared to face. It wasn't just about rockets. It was about the future of humanity, and that required more than just technical achievements. It required trust, patience, and unity. We need to show them that we can deliver, Elon said, determination rising in his voice. It's time to take a risk. We can't wait any longer for perfection. We need a clear victory, something that will remind them why we're doing this. Gwyn nodded, but there was a flicker of concern in her eyes. What are you thinking? I'm thinking it's time for the next big step, Elon replied, a spark of excitement igniting within him. We're going to Mars. We've talked about it for years. It's time to put a plan into action that shows the world we're serious. A manned mission to Mars. Let's make it happen. The idea of a manned mission to Mars wasn't new, but it was always a distant dream, a goal on the horizon. But Elon had decided that the time for dreams was over. It was time for action. The engineers, the scientists, the entire SpaceX team would have to work around the clock, but this was their moment to prove that SpaceX wasn't just a rocket company, it was the future of human space exploration. In the weeks that followed, the team at SpaceX worked tirelessly to develop a detailed plan for the manned mission. The spacecraft design was revised, with new life support systems, propulsion technologies, and safety measures being prioritized. Every aspect of the mission was scrutinized. They couldn't afford to make the same mistakes again. The pressure was immense. Each day, Elon held meetings with the engineers, the mission planners, and the coalition leaders. They discussed everything from launch windows to the logistics of sustaining life on Mars. This was a mission that would push the boundaries of human technology and endurance, and it would require every ounce of their collective expertise. But amidst all the pressure, something remarkable began to happen. The team began to feel a renewed sense of purpose. The late nights, the endless hours of testing and recalibration, they were no longer just for a lofty goal. They were working toward something tangible. They were working toward the future of humanity. One evening, after a particularly grueling meeting with the mission planners, Elon found himself alone in his office again. He was tired, but the weight of the mission pushed him forward. As he sat at his desk, staring at the new design specs for the Mars spacecraft, a notification popped up on his screen. It was a message from one of the coalition leaders. We've decided to give you the green light for the Mars mission. The first manned mission will begin in 3 years. We are all in. Elon smiled to himself, the pressure of the past weeks finally giving way to a sense of relief. But he knew the real work had only just begun. This was their moment to prove everything. Not just to the coalition, not just to the world, but to humanity itself. The first manned mission to Mars was more than just a trip to another planet. It was the manifestation of his dream, a dream that, for the first time, seemed within reach. And with it came the responsibility of ensuring that this dream didn't just benefit the few, but the many. Elon looked out the window again, the sun now setting behind the SpaceX campus. He felt a flicker of hope rising within him. Perhaps, just perhaps, the future wasn't as uncertain as it had seemed. They were about to take that next big step, into the unknown, into a future where humanity could look to the stars, and not just the earthbound troubles that had held them back for so long. The announcement was made. Elon stood before a crowd of reporters, engineers, and coalition leaders, feeling the weight of the moment press down on him. The decision had been made. In 3 years, the first manned mission to Mars would depart from Earth, and it would be SpaceX leading the charge. The dream he'd held for so long was now a tangible reality, and the world was about to witness it unfold. The buzz around the announcement was palpable. News outlets from around the globe covered the story, heralding it as one of the most ambitious projects in human history. Headlines read, Elon Musk to launch the first manned mission to Mars, SpaceX sets sights on the red planet, and humanity's leap into the stars begins with SpaceX. The world's reactions were a mix of awe and skepticism. There were those who viewed this as humanity's greatest achievement, the next step in the evolution of the species. But there were also critics, people who questioned whether the resources could be better spent solving problems here on Earth rather than trying to escape to another planet. Elon had expected the debate. He'd been living with it for years. But now, more than ever, it was clear to him that this mission wasn't just about Mars. It was about setting a precedent for humanity's future, about giving people hope, and inspiring them to believe in something bigger than themselves. 3 months after the announcement, the pressure of the mission began to settle in. The first wave of astronauts had been selected, 6 men and women from different countries, chosen for their diverse skills and backgrounds. They were the best of the best, the pioneers who would make history. They underwent rigorous training, preparing for everything, from the zero-gravity environment of deep space to the challenges of surviving on Mars. Elon watched them train, constantly reminded of the stakes at hand. These astronauts were more than just participants in a mission, they were the ambassadors of humanity's future. They would carry the weight of that responsibility on their shoulders, and he knew that every one of them would give everything they had to ensure success. The team at SpaceX worked tirelessly as well. Engineers, scientists, and technicians collaborated around the clock to perfect the spacecraft, the life support systems, the propulsion technology. Every detail had to be flawless. There was no room for error. The mission was already being called the greatest leap, and Elon was determined to make sure it lived up to its name. Yet, amidst the overwhelming optimism, there were those who questioned whether it could all come together in time. One morning, as Elon walked through the Mission Control Center, he overheard a conversation between 2 engineers. "I don't know, man," one of them said, clearly stressed. 3 years? That's cutting it close. We're still testing the new propulsion system. We haven't even launched a crewed test flight yet. There's too much that could go wrong. The second engineer nodded. "I get it. But the pressure's on. We have no choice but to keep pushing forward. People are watching us, and we can't afford to look like we're not ready." Elon overheard the conversation and stopped in his tracks. He knew the challenges the team was facing, and he understood the risks involved. But he also understood that progress couldn't be measured by perfection. It had never been about getting everything right, it had always been about pushing boundaries, embracing risk, and learning from failure. He walked over to the engineers and smiled. "You're right. There's a lot that can go wrong. But that's why we're doing this. Because we're willing to take those risks. If it were easy, it wouldn't be worth doing." The engineers exchanged a glance, nodding, reassured by Elon's words. "That's what we need to hear," one of them said, his tone lightening. Elon clapped both of them on the back. "Good work. Keep going. We're in this together." The countdown to the mission had officially begun. The next few years would be filled with countless tests, trials, and setbacks. But despite the challenges, the SpaceX team rallied behind Elon's vision. Their commitment was unwavering. Every team member knew that the fate of humanity's future lay in their hands. In the meantime, the world continued to watch. The media storm around SpaceX and Elon Musk intensified. Every new development in the mission, every small success, was met with front-page coverage. Yet, despite all the attention, Elon remained focused, almost detached from the public's view of him. He had a job to do, and that job was bigger than anything he'd ever faced. But as the launch date drew nearer, another challenge began to emerge: the public's expectations. Every time there was a minor hiccup, whether it was a delay in testing or a malfunction in one of the spacecraft's components, the media and critics jumped to conclusions, suggesting that SpaceX was in over its head. Some even predicted failure, using past setbacks to fuel their doubts. One evening, Elon sat in his office, reading through the latest reports. The headlines were a mixture of admiration and cynicism, and the word stung. Elon Musk's Mars mission, a step toward the future, or a dangerous gamble, one article questioned. Another read, SpaceX's Mars dream, can Musk really deliver? He sat back in his chair, allowing himself a rare moment of frustration. The pressure was mounting. The weight of every expectation, every criticism, was pressing on him like never before. But then, a thought struck him. What else was new? This was the story of his life, pushing through the doubts, the obstacles, the skepticism. Every major achievement he'd accomplished had been met with doubts, with ridicule, with predictions of failure. But he had always pushed through. And this time, it would be no different. It's worth it, he whispered to himself. It's all worth it. In the coming months, SpaceX would continue to make progress toward the mission. The launch window would open, and the team would face the final testing phase. But as they moved closer to the launch date, one thing was clear: this mission wasn't just about reaching Mars. It was about proving that humanity was capable of something extraordinary. And no matter how much doubt surrounded them, they would not be deterred. The countdown had begun, and they were ready for the challenge. It was exactly 1 year before the launch, and the air inside the SpaceX facilities was electric with anticipation. The mission to Mars had moved beyond the realm of theoretical possibility into the concrete reality of construction, testing, and final preparations. Every moment counted, every decision carried enormous weight. The whole world was watching, and they weren't about to let it slip away. Elon sat at his desk in the control room, flipping through the latest mission logs on his tablet. The spacecraft's final phase of testing had just wrapped up, but there were still major hurdles to overcome. The propulsion systems, the life support modules, the communication relay, all were working at near full capacity, but there was no room for error. Not when the mission was this high stakes. Gwyn, Elon called over his shoulder. Gwyn Shotwell, his trusted partner and SpaceX's president, entered the room with a look of determination. What's the update? Elon asked, not even looking up from the screen. His mind was already jumping ahead to the next problem. We're on track for the final pre-launch simulation, she replied. But there's something you need to know. There's been a new development with the coalition. Elon paused, finally looking up. He'd expected the usual political hurdles: somebody always had something to say about the cost, the timeline, or the risks. But this felt different. What happened? There's been significant pushback from some key members, she said. Some of the nations have expressed concerns about the risks of sending humans to Mars, particularly given the political instability on Earth. They're wondering if this is the right time. Elon's jaw tightened. He knew that the path to Mars had never been smooth, but hearing this news at this late stage was particularly disheartening. The mission had been approved, the funding allocated, the astronauts selected, but now, as the clock ticked down, doubt was creeping back in. Is this a deal-breaker? He asked, his voice calm but carrying an edge of frustration. We don't know yet, Gwyn said, shaking her head. But the coalition is threatening to hold back some of the funding unless we address their concerns. They're asking for a more thorough safety protocol and assurance that the mission won't result in a loss of life. Elon leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He'd known that the mission's success would hinge on maintaining the coalition's support, but this was different. The stakes had never been higher. Give me a few minutes, he said, standing up abruptly. I need to think this through. Gwyn didn't protest. She knew Elon well enough to give him the space he needed to process his thoughts. He walked to the window and looked out at the busy SpaceX campus. The bustling activity below seemed almost surreal. How many people had poured their lives into this project? How many hours, how many sleepless nights? And now, with everything within reach, the mission's future was being threatened by the same doubts that had dogged him for years. Elon turned back to Gwyn. We're going to need a solution. And we need it fast. A few hours later, Elon stood before a conference table in the main briefing room, facing a group of top engineers, astronauts, and coalition representatives via video call. The pressure in the room was palpable, everyone acutely aware that they were on the verge of a crucial decision. The next few minutes could make or break the entire mission. I know there's been some hesitation about proceeding with the mission, Elon began, addressing the group. I understand the concerns. The risks are high, and we're all aware of that. But this mission is not just about sending humans to Mars. It's about proving to the world that we can take humanity's future into our own hands. He paused, letting his words hang in the air. The room was silent, the weight of his statement sinking in. The world has always been full of doubters, he continued. Every major step forward in history has been met with skepticism. People questioned whether humans could fly. They questioned whether we could put a man on the moon. And now, they're questioning whether we should send people to Mars. Elon's eyes scanned the faces on the video call. He could see the uncertainty in some of them, the skepticism. But he also saw the quiet resolve in the eyes of his own team. They weren't backing down. We don't have the luxury of waiting for the perfect moment. We've always known that progress comes with risks. But that doesn't mean we should back away from them. He turned to the coalition representatives on the screen. I know you're concerned about safety, about the costs. But I'm telling you right now, SpaceX has put everything we have into making this mission as safe as possible. We've done everything in our power to prepare, to test, to refine. If we don't take this step now, we may never get another chance. The room was silent for a long moment, the tension almost unbearable. Then, one by one, the faces of the coalition representatives softened. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. It was clear that Elon's words had struck a chord. I'm ready to stand with you, Elon, one of the representatives said, his voice resolute. The mission is a go. We'll stand by the plan, but you have to promise that you'll keep us in the loop every step of the way. We need transparency. Elon's expression shifted from tension to something resembling relief. The coalition wasn't pulling out, but they were holding SpaceX to an even higher standard. This was their final chance to prove themselves. You'll get the transparency, Elon promised. We'll do this together. As the meeting concluded, Elon felt the weight of the decision settle in. The world would be watching, not just to see if they could make it to Mars, but to see if humanity could step into the future with courage and conviction. There was no turning back now. In the days that followed, SpaceX pushed forward with an intensity they hadn't known before. There was a renewed sense of purpose, a sense that they were on the precipice of something historic. The final tests were completed, the spacecraft ready, and the astronauts were undergoing their last stages of training. But despite the outward calm, Elon knew that time was running out. With each passing day, the pressure built, he could feel it in every meeting, in every conversation. The final countdown had begun, and there would be no margin for error. The clock on the wall in SpaceX's Mission Control Center ticked steadily. In 3 months, the first manned mission to Mars would launch, and it was now or never. Elon knew this was the moment that would define everything. As he stood in the control room, looking at the clock, he whispered to himself, "This is it. This is our shot." The days were blurring together now, every morning was an extension of the night before, filled with relentless work and testing. The mission to Mars was no longer just an idea, it was something tangible, something that Elon could feel in his bones. Every detail of the plan had been scrutinized, every flaw identified and addressed. SpaceX had achieved unprecedented milestones, and now the mission was on the verge of becoming a reality. But still, there was something gnawing at him. He couldn't shake the sense of doubt, the nagging thought that there was something they had missed. It was a feeling he had learned to live with over the years, but this time it felt different. It wasn't just the typical anxiety that came with any high-stakes project, it was a deep, unsettling sensation that they were standing on the precipice of something far greater than any previous challenge. A few days before the final pre-launch inspection, Elon found himself walking through the hangar, passing by the sleek, almost otherworldly spacecraft that would carry humanity to Mars. It stood there, an engineering marvel, glimmering in the artificial lights, its silver surface reflecting the ambition of every person who had worked on it. It was beautiful, and it was terrifying. "What's the latest on the system checks?" he asked, his voice firm yet tinged with an urgency he couldn't quite explain. He was speaking to a senior engineer, who had just finished reviewing some reports. "We're good on everything except for the life support system's atmospheric balance," the engineer replied. "It's been a bit more unpredictable than we anticipated, but we're working on it. It's not a showstopper, but it'll need another day of recalibration." Elon's brow furrowed. Time was running out. "We can't afford any delays," he said, more to himself than to the engineer. "Make sure we push through the final adjustments, and I want hourly updates on that. We can't take any risks now." The engineer nodded and walked away, leaving Elon alone with his thoughts. Back in the conference room, the mood was tense. The final simulations were taking place. The astronauts were already on standby, ready for their last phase of training before the mission. Elon and Gwyn stood by the large screen, watching as the spacecraft was tested in a virtual environment, its system subjected to the harsh conditions they would encounter on the journey to Mars. "We're so close," Gwyn said, her voice quiet but filled with awe. "It's hard to believe this is happening. After all these years." Elon nodded, his mind still racing. "We're close. But close isn't enough. Everything's in place," she reassured him. "We've made it this far. But this is it. This is the make or break point." Elon ran a hand through his hair. "It's always been easy to dream of Mars. But actually getting there is a whole different challenge." Gwyn didn't argue. She knew that no matter how many tests they ran or how much planning had gone into the mission, the final outcome was never guaranteed. This was an unprecedented endeavor, and everything about it, from the technical challenges to the human factor, was a huge unknown. "Elon," she said softly, "you've done something extraordinary. You've brought this to life. No one else has even come close to this." Elon stared at the screen, watching the simulated spacecraft glide through space, its engines firing smoothly. But there was a quiet part of him that wondered if they were truly ready. Later that evening, the astronauts gathered in the training room, each one focused, calm, and resolute. They had undergone the most rigorous preparation imaginable. They had been through mock scenarios, emergency drills, and simulations that tested their ability to withstand the unimaginable. For months, they had worked tirelessly, pushing their minds and bodies to their limits. Elon stood at the back of the room, watching as the team ran through their final checklist. There were 6 of them, 2 women and 4 men, each one selected not only for their expertise but for their mental fortitude. They had been through hell and back, and now, they were ready to face the ultimate frontier. Captain James Harper, the mission commander, was leading the briefing. He was a seasoned astronaut, calm under pressure, with an air of authority that put everyone at ease. His eyes flicked toward Elon as he spoke. "Elon," Captain Harper said, nodding in his direction, "we're good to go. All systems are ready. I know there's always uncertainty when it comes to a mission like this, but we're as ready as we can be." Elon approached the group, the weight of his decision heavy on his shoulders. He looked into their eyes, one by one. They were not only astronauts, they were the first representatives of humanity to step onto another planet. Their success or failure would define everything that came after them. "I know the risks," Elon said, his voice steady but carrying the gravity of the moment. "And I know the burden you carry. But you are here because I believe in you. We all do. This mission isn't just about getting to Mars, it's about what comes after. It's about setting the foundation for humanity's future. He paused, letting his words sink in. Remember, we're not just going to Mars for the science or the glory. We're doing it because the future of humanity depends on it. There was a silence in the room, and for a brief moment, it felt as though the enormity of their task hung in the air, unspoken but understood by everyone in the room. Any questions? Captain Harper asked, breaking the stillness. The astronauts exchanged glances but said nothing. There was no need for more words. They had all been prepared for this moment. They were ready. As Elon left the training room, he couldn't help but feel the weight of history bearing down on him. The launch window was fast approaching, and the world was watching. The public, the critics, the space industry, all eyes were fixed on SpaceX and Elon Musk. There was no room for failure. There never had been. He stepped into his office and took a seat, allowing himself a rare moment of reflection. He thought about all the years of struggle, all the times people told him it couldn't be done. He thought about the failures, the rockets that exploded, the contracts that fell through, the doubts that seemed to follow him at every turn. But despite everything, here he was. On the brink of something extraordinary. He looked up at the framed photo of the first Falcon Heavy launch, a symbol of SpaceX's defiance against the odds. He couldn't help but smile. This mission to Mars, would be the next step. And they were going to make it happen. The clock ticked down. The final preparations were in motion. And in less than a month, SpaceX's Mars mission would change everything. The final days before the launch were a whirlwind of activity, as if time itself was accelerating in its quest to bring SpaceX's Mars mission to fruition. Elon was buried deep in technical reports, consultations with engineers, and late-night strategy sessions with Gwyn and his team. The mission's countdown had begun, and every moment was filled with a sense of urgency and anticipation. Yet, despite the preparation, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that something beyond the technicalities was brewing, something he couldn't control. It was early morning when Elon received an unexpected message. He had just arrived at the SpaceX headquarters, coffee in hand, ready to dive into another round of checks and systems reports. As he approached his office, his phone buzzed with a notification, an urgent email from the Mars mission's legal team. "Gwyn, can you come here for a minute?" Elon called out, his voice more strained than usual. Within moments, Gwyn appeared at his door. She could see the tension in his posture even before he had a chance to speak. "It's the legal team," Elon said, handing her the phone. "They're bringing up concerns, again. They've found some discrepancies in the mission's terms with the coalition." Gwyn frowned as she read the email. The message was clear: there was a growing movement among some of the key backers, particularly a few of the international coalitions, who were beginning to push back on the terms of the mission agreement. Some were questioning the validity of the insurance coverage, while others were concerned about the safety clauses regarding human life. "This could jeopardize everything," Gwyn said, her voice tight with concern. "I know," Elon said, rubbing his temples. "We're so close to launch, and they want to pull the rug out from under us. Is there any way we can address these issues without derailing the whole mission?" Gwyn asked, her brow furrowed. Elon paced the room for a few moments, deep in thought. He had dealt with this kind of resistance before, skeptics, naysayers, and even outright opponents, but this was different. The stakes were higher now, and the global pressure had never been so intense. The countdown to Mars was not just a race to space, it was a race against time, bureaucracy, and politics. "I'm going to have to meet with them," Elon said, his voice unwavering. "We'll have to push hard, negotiate. There's no room for compromise. The mission has to move forward." 2 days later, Elon found himself in a private conference room, face to face with a group of legal and political representatives from the international coalition. The room was large, austere, with a long polished table separating Elon from the group of skeptics and backers. Among them were executives from major space agencies, insurance specialists, and even high-ranking government officials from various nations that had agreed to fund part of the mission. Gwyn sat beside him, offering silent support. The air in the room was thick with tension. The discussion was set to be difficult. As Elon took his seat, he glanced around at the faces that had once been his allies. Now, they seemed like adversaries. "Let's get straight to the point," Elon began, his tone as direct as ever. "We have the spacecraft. We have the crew. And we're on track to make history. But these recent concerns about safety and insurance," he paused, looking each person in the eye, "are delaying the mission. If we don't address this now, we will lose our window." The silence that followed was heavy. One of the representatives, a stern-faced woman from the European Union, was the first to speak. "Mr. Musk," she said, her voice formal and deliberate. "You've pushed this mission to the edge of feasibility. But we're not just talking about a technological breakthrough. We're talking about human lives. The insurance policy you've provided for the mission is insufficient given the risks involved. The terms need to be restructured before we can proceed." Elon's eyes hardened, but he remained composed. "The insurance policy is the most comprehensive we've ever seen. We've mitigated every risk we can. But space is inherently dangerous. That's the reality we have to face." "It's not enough," the woman interjected. "We need more assurances, more safeguards. The coalition is not prepared to accept anything less. We're putting our resources into this project, and we need to know you have covered every angle. Otherwise, we may have to pull our funding." Elon's jaw clenched. This was the moment of truth. He had always known the mission would face resistance, but this was different. He was being forced to confront the hard limits of politics and bureaucracy, the very forces that had once threatened to hold back his dreams. And in this moment, Elon Musk had a decision to make: compromise and risk losing everything, or push back and risk alienating his supporters. "Let me make this very clear," Elon said, standing up, his voice sharp with conviction. "We are not backing down. We've come too far, and we're not going to let a few legal technicalities stop us from achieving what we set out to do. You can throw all the paperwork at us that you want, but in the end, this mission is bigger than any one contract. It's bigger than any one country or any one agency. It's about the future of humanity. And I will not let anything get in the way of that." The room was quiet for a long moment. Then, the representative from the United States, a seasoned government official, spoke up. "Elon, you've made your point," he said slowly. "But you need to understand that there's a lot at stake here. We can't simply ignore the concerns. We have to find a way to meet halfway." "I won't compromise on safety," Elon said firmly, "but I'm willing to listen. If there are real concerns that can be addressed without compromising the mission, then I'm open to discussing them. But we move forward. No matter what." The tension in the room shifted as the representatives exchanged glances. Slowly, they began to murmur amongst themselves. A few minutes later, the woman from the European Union spoke again, this time more cautiously. "We'll agree to a short-term extension. We'll rework the insurance terms, but we'll need to see more evidence of the safety measures and a stronger guarantee that the risk to human life is minimal. After all, if this mission fails, the ramifications will affect the entire global space industry." Elon nodded, but there was no trace of relief in his expression. The negotiation had been grueling, but it wasn't over yet. There would be more hurdles ahead, more hurdles that couldn't be predicted. He turned to Gwyn, who gave him a small nod of support. They had won this round, but Elon knew the real challenge lay ahead, not just making it to Mars, but surviving the political minefield that awaited them once they got there. As the meeting ended and the representatives began to file out, Elon felt a mix of exhaustion and determination. They were still on track, but the battle wasn't over. And as he watched the sun setting outside the window, he realized that this mission was not just about conquering space, it was about battling against every force that tried to hold them back. The final countdown was ticking, but now, more than ever, Elon understood that the real test wasn't just technological. It was about perseverance, conviction, and the unyielding belief that humanity's future was worth the fight. The days leading up to the launch were a blur of endless preparations. Elon barely had time to sleep, let alone process the enormity of what was happening. The weight of history loomed over him, pressing down on his every move. The Mars mission was not just a personal dream anymore, it had become a symbol for humanity's future, a defining moment in the evolution of space exploration. And with that weight came a creeping sense of isolation. He hadn't felt this alone in years, despite being surrounded by thousands of people working tirelessly to make the dream a reality. But in the quiet moments, when he sat in his office staring at the giant screens tracking the mission's progress, the enormity of what they were about to undertake felt overwhelming. There was no going back now. The mission was set, and the eyes of the world were upon them. But Elon knew one thing for sure, he couldn't afford to show weakness. The team, the astronauts, the investors, everyone was looking to him to lead them through the storm. And so, as the final launch day approached, Elon put aside his own doubts, focusing solely on the task ahead. He couldn't afford to falter now. It was the morning of the launch, and SpaceX's headquarters was a hive of activity. Engineers, astronauts, and technicians rushed from station to station, ensuring every system was fully operational. The world was watching, waiting for the moment when humanity would take its first steps toward another planet. Elon stood with Gwyn, both of them watching the preparations unfold. The massive Falcon Super Heavy rocket, now fully loaded with fuel, stood tall on the launch pad. It was a majestic sight, a testament to years of hard work, risk, and innovation. Gwyn turned to Elon, a slight smile on her face. "We made it," she said, her voice filled with a quiet pride. Elon didn't return the smile. "Not yet," he replied, his voice low and serious. "Not until the job is done." He looked out at the rocket, the wind gently rustling the flags nearby. "I never imagined it would feel like this," he admitted, his tone almost reflective. "So close to something this big, this important. It's more than I expected." "You've spent your life working toward this moment," Gwyn said softly. "This is the culmination of everything you've dreamed of." Elon nodded but said nothing. He had worked for this moment, yes, but it wasn't about his dreams anymore. It was about the team, the astronauts, and the millions of people watching this historic event. The stakes were higher than they had ever been. One small mistake, one overlooked detail, and it could all come crashing down. As the final countdown began, the atmosphere shifted. Tension built, slowly but surely, as the hours ticked down. Elon found himself pacing the room, his mind working through 1,000 thoughts at once. He had been in stressful situations before, countless launches, high-stakes negotiations, even a court case that had nearly ruined him. But this was different. This was the culmination of everything he had worked for, the moment that would define not just his legacy, but the future of humanity. A sudden voice interrupted his thoughts. It was one of the engineers, coming in through the door with a tablet in hand. "Elon, we've just finished the final system checks," the engineer said. "Everything is green across the board. The astronauts are suited up and ready for launch." Elon's heart skipped a beat. The final check had passed. They were really going to do this. But despite the green lights and positive reports, a part of him couldn't shake the feeling of impending uncertainty. He had seen too many things go wrong at the last minute to let his guard down now. "Are we sure the life support systems are functioning?" Elon asked, his voice firm. "We're good," the engineer replied, "all systems are a go." Elon let out a breath, his shoulders relaxing slightly. But he didn't have much time to enjoy the moment. The countdown clock continued to tick, each second bringing them closer to history. Inside the command center, a sense of organized chaos filled the room. Engineers and mission specialists communicated over radios and headsets, checking and rechecking the systems in real time. On the big screens, the astronauts were preparing for their final briefing, adjusting their helmets and checking their suits. The world's attention was fixed on this single moment. 3 minutes to launch, a voice boomed over the intercom. Elon stood, his gaze fixed on the screens showing the astronauts, as if willing them to succeed. He knew each of them personally, had trained them, and had carefully selected them for this mission. But even with all his faith in them, a knot of fear twisted in his gut. Space was unforgiving, and Mars was an unknown that even the brightest minds couldn't fully comprehend. The final moments were a blur of noise and action. 10 seconds, came the call over the loudspeaker. Elon stood frozen, watching the rocket on the screen as the final countdown began. His heart pounded in his chest, the pressure building with every second. He glanced over at Gwyn, who gave him a reassuring nod, but even she couldn't hide the anxiety in her eyes. The room held its breath. 3, 2, 1, ignition. The roar of the rocket engines filled the air as the Falcon Super Heavy launched into the sky, trailing flames and smoke behind it. The sound reverberated through the building, and Elon felt it deep in his chest. It was the sound of a dream taking flight. Elon's eyes followed the rocket's ascent on the screen, his hands gripping the edge of the table. The journey had begun. For a moment, everything seemed to stand still. Time itself paused as the rocket climbed higher, pushing through the clouds and into the stratosphere. Elon held his breath, eyes glued to the screen, waiting for that critical moment when the booster would separate and the ship would continue on its journey to Mars. And then, the voice came through the intercom, booster separation successful. All systems go. Elon exhaled sharply, a wave of relief washing over him. But it was short-lived. They had made it past one hurdle, but there were many more to come. The real test was yet to be faced, navigating the unknowns of deep space and landing on Mars. Back in the mission control room, the crowd erupted in applause. The first stage was a success. The rocket was on its way, and humanity's first journey to Mars had begun. But for Elon, the celebration was fleeting. His eyes stayed on the screens, watching the spacecraft continue its journey. It wasn't over. Not yet. The hardest part was still ahead. And as he stood there, a quiet realization settled in. Despite all the challenges, the failures, the doubts, this was happening. They were going to Mars. The days after the launch were a blur. Elon watched as the Falcon Super Heavy's progress was tracked in real time, the spacecraft's journey to Mars steadily advancing. Each day brought new data, new calculations, and fresh insights. Yet, despite the seemingly endless stream of positive reports, a sense of unease lingered in the pit of his stomach. The hardest part was still ahead, getting the crew to Mars safely and establishing a viable, sustainable presence there. It was impossible to ignore the enormity of the task ahead. Space was still the final frontier, and the unknowns were vast. There were no guarantees. They had pushed the boundaries of technology, finance, and human willpower, but the real challenges lay in the months ahead. If the mission was to succeed, they needed to solve problems that no one had ever anticipated. And it wasn't just the technical challenges that weighed on him. The political, economic, and societal implications of what they were doing were staggering. They weren't just launching a spacecraft. They were creating the foundation for humanity's future in space. Elon was at the helm of something that would change the world forever, whether it succeeded or failed. The crew on board the spacecraft, led by Commander Alex Stevens, had begun their journey toward Mars. Alex had been with SpaceX for years, an astronaut who had weathered countless hours of training. His calm demeanor and unwavering focus made him the ideal leader for this mission. Still, as Elon watched the daily updates, he couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility for each of them. They weren't just astronauts. They were pioneers. Each communication with Alex and the crew was brief, efficient, and precise. The ship was performing well, and the crew was settling into their routines. But for Elon, the gap between Earth and Mars seemed impossibly wide. He had spent so much time dreaming of this moment, but now that it was here, it felt surreal. On one of the rare occasions when Elon allowed himself to pause, he met with Gwyn in his office. "Elon, it's working," she said, her voice filled with a quiet relief. "The systems are functioning perfectly, the trajectory is spot on, and the crew is in good spirits. We're on track." He nodded, but the anxiety that had been gnawing at him remained. "It's not over yet," he said softly. "We're still a long way from landing." Gwyn could see the weight on his shoulders, the quiet fears that never fully left him. "Elon," she said, her voice softer now, "you've done something no one else has done before. You've given humanity a chance at something greater." He looked out the window, staring at the horizon. "But if this fails, if anything goes wrong, it's not just my failure. It's all of ours." "You've prepared for this," Gwyn said firmly. "You've worked with the best team, assembled the smartest minds, and made the impossible possible. You're not alone in this." Elon nodded, though the doubt still lingered. There were too many variables, too many unknowns. He had taken risks his entire life, but this was different. This was the ultimate gamble. Back at SpaceX headquarters, the mood was a mix of excitement and apprehension. Teams worked around the clock, monitoring the spacecraft's progress, conducting regular simulations, and refining their strategies for the upcoming Mars landing. Every day felt like a countdown to something unknown. Then came the call that Elon had been dreading. "Mr. Musk, we have a situation," the voice on the other end of the line said. It was one of the engineers responsible for monitoring the spacecraft's systems. "What's happening?" Elon's heart skipped a beat. "There's been a slight anomaly in the fuel systems," the engineer continued, his voice tight with concern. "It's nothing we can't handle, but we need your approval to send a fix." Elon's mind raced. Fuel systems. A problem with the propulsion system could jeopardize everything. They had gone through countless tests, and yet there were still so many variables in play. "How serious is it?" he asked, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. "Right now, it's contained," the engineer said. "But if left unaddressed, it could escalate. We've identified the problem, and we're ready to send the fix immediately." Elon's fingers drummed against the edge of his desk. Time was critical. The crew couldn't afford to wait for a slow fix if the situation was worsening. His decision would shape the future of the mission. "Send the fix," Elon said, without hesitation. "Now." The engineer acknowledged, and Elon immediately shifted his attention back to the ongoing operation. He called Gwyn, who was overseeing the mission's daily operations, and quickly briefed her on the issue. Despite the seriousness of the situation, there was a sense of calm between them. "We've handled things like this before," Gwyn said. "We just need to stay focused. It's all part of the process." Elon didn't say anything for a moment. He knew that, at this point, failure wasn't an option. The entire world was watching, and the future of humanity's place in space depended on their success. There was no turning back. The fix was sent, and the team worked tirelessly through the night, monitoring the spacecraft's response. Every update brought a new wave of tension, and Elon stayed at his desk, barely moving. Hours passed in a haze, until finally, the signal came through, the issue had been resolved. The spacecraft's fuel systems were functioning properly once more. The relief was almost overwhelming. Elon let out a long breath, his body aching from the stress, but his mind still racing. There was no time to rest. They were still on their way to Mars, and there were many more challenges to face. Several weeks later, the moment of truth arrived. The spacecraft had entered the final stages of its journey to Mars. Elon stood in the control room, watching as the countdown to the landing began. The tension in the room was palpable as the crew prepared for the most dangerous phase of the mission, landing on Mars. The communication came through, clear and steady. Alex Stevens's voice, calm and focused, echoed in the room. "We're preparing for landing. All systems are green. We're ready." Elon's heart raced as the final minutes ticked down. For the first time in his life, the vastness of space felt all-encompassing, its challenges daunting, and its mysteries endless. But there was no turning back now. 3, 2, 1, touchdown, Alex's voice came through the speaker. And then, silence. A moment of stillness, as if the entire world was holding its breath. And then, the eruption of cheers from the mission control room. Elon stood there, motionless, as the realization hit him. They had done it. Humanity had reached Mars. The road ahead would still be filled with challenges, and there was much work to be done. But for now, they had crossed the greatest threshold in human exploration. And as Elon Musk stood there, surrounded by his team, he realized that this was just the beginning. They had reached the stars. And now, the real journey had begun. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?